Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good evening, everyone. At this time, I'd like to welcome you to the special council meeting of May the 4th. Before I start the Pledge of Allegiance, just to explain that this is a special council meeting, and we will be dealing with one item and one item only during the council meeting. Once that meeting is done, then we will adjourn to reconvene for the standard city council study session, which is scheduled to start immediately following this. At this time, I would ask each of you in your own way, if you would please, join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This time, Ms. Parker, would you please take the roll?
Mayor Atchison.
Here.
Councilor DeMott.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Seitz.
Present.
Councilor Seymour.
Here.
Councilor Scully.
Here.
Councilor Smith.
Present.
And Councilor Vols.
Present. Thank you, Council. At this time, I'm going to turn this over to Don Tripp, our city manager, and we're going to talk about resolution number 15. It's an IGA with the Adams County in regards to our Corona aid and the CARES Act. So, Mr. Tripp, would you take us forward for now?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item is on the agenda for your consideration as consequence of the CARES Act on a federal level. I'm going to be passing this to City Attorney Frankel and Chris Lindsay, who's our budget director, and potentially other staff to answer the details of the documents that are in front of you. I just would like to say how grateful I am for the working relationship that we have with Adams County, particularly their county manager, Ray Gonzalez. This money is actually routed to Adams County, who is eligible because we are a government jurisdiction, over 500,000 people. So these funds are not being distributed to all cities across America. In fact, I can tell you there are states that aren't able to distribute these to any local governments because they don't have that size population. In addition to that, Adams County, in our jurisdiction, which of course is roughly 60% of our city, has agreed to re-grant some funds on a shared basis with the city of Westminster The amount of those funds is in front of you tonight, and it's $5,507,507.90. In addition to your action here this evening, we'll have an item on the special, I should say, the study session agenda to describe to you our recommendations for the high-level objectives that we would use, the guiding principles that we would use to distribute these funds. The one caveat is that this agreement requires us to have these funds expended by December 4th. They'll be distributed to us in thirds, and we'll need to provide receipts after each third to get the next third. So we're under a relatively short time frame to spend this kind of money. We have to be thoughtful and wise about spending it in compliance with the federal government's requirements, our goals, and in a way that if audited, we can respond to. I'm confident we'll be able to do that. So with that, Mayor, I'd pass it back to you for questions Mayor Pro Tem and the councilors might have, and ask Dave Frankel and Chris Lindsay to direct those answers.
Before we take questions, Mr. Frankel or Mr. Lindsay, do either one of you have any comments you want to make before we go into the questions from council?
Mr. Mayor, this is Dave Frankel, City Attorney. I would just add to what Mr. Tripp provided that the Adams County Commissioners, I understand, will be taking up this tomorrow at their meeting, and the distribution amounts, I understand, will be formalized at that point. The estimate that we have today is a draft estimate, the $5.5 million, and I expect that tomorrow we will learn what the final number is. The proposed IGA was distributed by the Adams County Attorney, and it contemplates the disbursements occurring in 3 installments, and that once we have received each 1/3 of the total, we would then be providing documentation to Adams County as to how the funds were spent. And the December 4th cutoff date, as my understanding, is intended to facilitate, unspent dollars being returned to the county so that the county could theoretically spend them before December 30th, which I believe is their deadline by which all the funds need to be spent or else returned to the federal government. So I just add that. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lindsay, you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe Mr. Frankel covered all of my points. I just would like to add, I'm really proud of the partnership amongst local governments in Adams County to get this done as quick as we have. And I think with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
All right, as soon as I get a resolution we'll put up here, we'll go with that. Just before I take the resolution, one thing for council, keep in mind that this is from Adams County. We expect an IGA, similar IGA coming from Jefferson County yet, but we don't have an idea when that one's coming forward. It's not before us tonight, so we're only dealing with Adams County. Let me turn to the council at this point for the resolution. Mr. DeMott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to adopt resolution number 15, authorizing an intergovernmental agreement between Adams County and the City of Westminster regarding distribution of Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Acts Fund.
Ms. Smith.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Council members, you have any other questions or comments on this motion? Ms. Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did just want to say very briefly, thank you to city staff and to yourself for quickly issuing the emergency order so that we could start calculating the cost of responding to COVID, which is obviously something outside of the typical scope of what we do as a city, and so that we can get reimbursed. I also want to say thank you to Adams County, and I'm happy to hear that we've had such strong regional collaboration throughout all of this.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. Mr. Frankel, you said that 1/3 of each installment will need to provide documentation on, will council be getting those receipts? And then my second question is, for the dollars that we've received, does it specifically go to COVID assistance, or is there some kind of allotment that we can provide in other areas that we might be needing these funds towards?
Mr. Frankel?
Thank you, Councilor Smith. So I'm going to look to Mr. Lindsay and the team that he has with finance as to the eligible expenses that would qualify for reimbursement under the CARES Act. But it's my understanding that the documentation that we would be providing to Adams County would articulate and identify each of the expenses that we are incurring and seek reimbursement from the county for that. Mr. Lindsay?
I could actually ask if our chief financial officer wanted to come on board. I know we were going to discuss this in the study session portion of the meeting tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay and Councilor Smith. This is Larry Dorr, Chief Financial Officer and Deputy City Manager. Let's see. The city will, in accordance with the intergovernmental agreement, receive the funds in advance, and then we'll be dispersing those funds as a city in accordance to appropriations that council will be making in the future. So the public, mayor and council will have obviously some good insight into how those funds will be dispersed. And I'll be discussing those during the study session portion of the night ahead a little bit later tonight. So you'll have a much closer opportunity to understand how the funds will be dispersed on behalf of the city. And then after 1/3 of the funds have been dispersed, the city will be able to submit a second 1/3 invoice to the county for funds to be received by the city in advance, which the city will then be able to disperse at some point in the future as appropriated by city council. The purpose of having this resolution before you tonight is so that the city can enter into this intergovernmental agreement and be prepared to receive the funds as soon as possible from Adams County. And once they're secured, then in accordance with the guiding principles, which I'll have a little bit later on tonight, will guide the future disbursement of those funds. But for the moment, we've just received this draft intergovernmental agreement within the last business day or two, and felt that the first step would be for council to enter into it and secure the funds as a first step.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for your team's hard work on securing these funds for us. So thank you.
Mr. Voles?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a really quick question. It was probably in the packet, but I'm having a hard time finding it. What is the time frame for receiving this money and spending the money? Is it the end of the year, or do we have an earlier date to get the money out and account for it? Thank you.
Let me respond to your second part. December 4th is the date that we have to have the funds expended. Mr. Dorr, you want to talk to the other part of that question?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Let's see. We're still making arrangements for the receipt of the funds. In fact, I had a meeting just this morning with the leadership at Adams County, describing some next steps in the process. So this has been a real immediate and short-term discussion. In fact, I think we saw our first draft of this intergovernmental agreement that you have tonight. I think it was sometime Thursday, and then you'll recall that we had the special notice very soon thereafter. So this is a very quick turnaround time. We anticipate, should this be approved by council, that the intergovernmental agreement would be executed in the morning and delivered to Adams County right at the time that their Board of County Commissioners is taking official action for the disbursement of funds. And then once the city files an invoice, we'll hopefully have turnaround just within a few days. And I've got a few more of those dates in my one of my 2 slides that I'll be presenting a little bit later tonight on the study session. So you'll have a few more details, but it's a very, very short-term situation, just a matter of days as it is.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And I also want to extend my thank you to staff for working on this, for the mayor attending countless meetings, and our city manager. Thank you all for working on this. $5.5 million. I appreciate it, and I plan to vote yes. Thank you.
Just a reminder, so there's not a misunderstanding. We do not get the entire $5 million at one whack. We get, as Mr. Tripp and Mr. Frankel and everybody else on the staff has indicated, we get 1/3 of the money. We have to provide all the receipts and stuff on how we spent the money. If they approve that, we get the next third. Same thing again to get to the final third. But again, the date for expenditure of all funds is December the 4th. Are there any other questions or comments from council? If not, I have a first by Mr. Demott and a second by Ms. Smith for approval of resolution number 15. Ms. Parker, this is a roll call vote. Would you please run the call?
Certainly. Mayor Atchison,
Yes.
Councilor Demott,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Sites,
Yes.
Councilor Seymour,
Yes.
Councilor Scully,
Yes.
Councilor Smith,
Yes.
and Councilor Vols.
Yes.
Thank you, council. We have a 7-0 vote in favor of adoption of resolution number 15. That includes all business that is scheduled for the special council meeting tonight. At this time, this meeting is adjourned. Turning to the next item for tonight is a study session that is scheduled, so part of our normal agenda tonight. I'm going to ask the council members to go ahead and use the roll call that was done with the council so that it shows that everyone's here. City staff will come on for the presentations here shortly. I want to go to the council first to let them see if they have any comments or anything they'd like to add tonight. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Quick update on a couple of things. Keep in mind that we have some moving targets going on around the metro area. We have different actions that are being taken by the various health departments, Jefferson County, Tri-County, and a number of the cities. So we are getting already a hodgepodge of enforcement actions or compliance requirements in the area of face covering. Today, it was reiterated that Denver will be going to a mandatory one effective Wednesday. This morning, Boulder and Lone Tree put that into effect last week. Wheat Ridge. At the council meetings tonight for Lafayette, Louisville, Superior, Longmont, those city councils are all taking it up either tonight or tomorrow night and have indicated they plan to go to the required face coverings. We will be discussing that again later tonight based upon the feedback we had late this afternoon, which council has been provided. And we'll call that in a portion of item 3 tonight. We have also an unfortunate announcement that I received at about 5 o'clock this afternoon. The Colorado Municipal League has, as of this afternoon, has canceled the CML conference that was scheduled to be held in Westminster for this year. However, they have plugged Westminster back in for the 2025 time of the conference being held here in Westminster, and is still planned to be held at the Westin Hotel. It was unfortunate, but based upon where we're at with the COVID-19, the social distancing and stuff, they had asked the hotel to work with them to renegotiate a date because of the uncertainty for their vendors and their sponsors and stuff. So unfortunately, that has finally come to a resolution today. Other than that, I'll go back. I see Mr. Demott, you have a quick comment, and we'll go into the presentations for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just real quick question for you, Mr. Mayor, and then I want to make a quick comment. So the request to talk about the letter sent out on the masks, we're going to talk about that all as one item.
We'll talk about the piece this afternoon on the COVID updates.
Great. The other thing, just since we're on the topic of masks, I know with the way that we're doing the meetings, we have a lot more people tuning in, which I appreciate. I want to take a minute to thank all the countless different citizens who I know have been donating masks and different supplies to our frontline workers. I have seen various different people that post on Facebook doing hundreds and hundreds of masks that they're donating to our people and to different organizations around the city. So I think it's really impressive to see how the citizens of our city have stepped up to fill that need.
Any other comments from council before we start the agenda? Okay, Mr. Tripp, let's go to presentations. If you have no other reports. If you do, go ahead with your report at this time.
No, Mr. Mayor, I think I'll defer that. If there's time left, maybe after the COVID agenda, I'll maybe make a comment. But I think what I'd like to do is go into the presentations. We are continuing to be open for business. We're continuing to plan for the future with resources available to do that and think about how to wisely continue to maintain the city's infrastructure. In that regard, I want to have Max Kirschbaum, the Director of Public Works and Utilities, come up to introduce a presentation on our street maintenance program.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Good evening, City Council. The information presentation that you're about to receive this evening was originally scheduled for you back in March. That study session topic was postponed due to COVID-19. And it is our intention to try to bring you this streets information update. I call it a state of the streets type presentation on an annual basis. In this case, it's been a little bit more than a year since we've presented this information to you. This evening, our Street Operations Division Manager, Kurt Muehlmeyer, will be making the presentation. And I would like to also point out that also on the line this evening is our Pavement Management Coordinator, Brock Hufford. Between the two of them, they put this presentation together, but for ease of presentation, Kurt will be making the presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Kurt.
Thank you, Max. And thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Councilors, for your time and attention this evening. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about something that we are very passionate about in streets. And along the way here, if we do have questions arise, please let me know. Be happy to answer them as they come up. And with that, we'll get underway here on the next slide. So if you want to take a look at kind of a 5,000 foot view of the city's street infrastructure, the city's street infrastructure is made up of 2,430 streets. Those comprise 1,135 lane miles. And just for reference, a lane mile is an area measurement. It's 5,280 feet by 12 feet. So to give you some perspective on how much asphalt and how much pavement that is, if you took all of the asphalt in Westminster and stretched it out into one 12-foot wide section, it would stretch from Westminster to Chicago. And so when we talk about our streets, that does not include the state highways that traverse the city, and that would include State Highway 121, State Highway 95, 287, I-25, and US 36. So our total street network has a replacement value of $600 million. And so when I say replacement value of the pavement, I'm not talking about curb and gutter. I'm not talking about street signs, pavement markings. That's just the pavement alone. And so if you turn your attention to the right of that slide, you can look at, this is from our 2018 citizen survey. Street repair in that survey was listed as the highest importance item with the lowest quality as judged by our residents. And we'll dive into that a little bit more in the next slide. So these are the results of the 2018 citizen survey. If you look at some of the numbers that are up there, 92% of our residents think that street repair is very important or essential, but only 56% of our residents think that our roads are less than good condition. And that's the reason for that graph on the first slide. So we go to the next slide, please. So in order to track our pavement, we use a pretty high-tech pavement management system that we've had since 2017. And you're going to hear us talk a little bit about PQI. PQI is an acronym that we use a lot. It's short for Pavement Quality Index. And what that means is we collect a lot of data. All this data is distress data. And this distress data is used to come up with a number that goes from 0 to 100. 0 meaning a completely failed road, 100 meaning the perfect, brand new, best road that could possibly be. So there's a little bit of animation on here if you roll through some of that, please. So the first one that goes into PQI is the surface distresses. So surface distresses are that you can see with your eye. That'd be cracking, rutting, and those kind of distresses. If you go to the next one, please. Smoothness is the other data point that we collect. Smoothness, obviously, when you roll over a bump or a low utility cover, it's not a smooth road. That goes into PQI. Next one, please. So structural integrity, we collect structural integrity data, and that is the ability of a pavement to carry loads. Obviously, a road that has good structural integrity is a good road. One that doesn't have a structural integrity is not a good road. It all goes into the PQI. And go to the final one, please. We also collect thickness data. Here in Colorado, and specifically in Westminster, we have a lot of thick roads, especially our arterial roads, and they need to be thick to sustain the traffic loading that they're subjected to. So we test that and track it, and it all goes in to come up with that PQI number. Go to the next slide, please. So when we did our last survey, we surveyed every single road in the city of Westminster, and using all of that information that I just talked about, all of those attributes for the PQI number, our average PQI rating for the city is 65.6, and that puts us into a fair category. And we'll get a little bit into some of the historical numbers, but right now that's where we sit at a 65.6. And something that's kind of misleading about that number is when you look at our arterial roadways, those are shared in 112th, 104th, the roads that carry a lot of traffic. The average PQI for those roadways is well over 75. It's much higher. It's into the good category. When you get into the collector roads, for instance, Legacy Ridge Parkway, Bruche Parkway, some of the collector roadways, that's up in the upper 60s, so just under the good category. But when you look at our local roadways, those are below 60. So that's what's dragging the overall average PQI number down. So we go to the next slide, please. So this is a fundamental, anybody who's ever seen or heard about pavement management has probably seen this chart before. This little red line that you see on the screen here is the typical life of an asphalt pavement, right? You start up at the very top in excellent condition, and as time goes on, it kind of diminishes, and there's a point there somewhere around good where it gets very steep. There's a little bit of animation on this slide if you could run some of those. So between excellent and fair, you see a drop in quality by 40%, and you've used up 75% of the life of that pavement. And then from fair to failed, you see another 40% drop in quality, and by the time it's failed, you have about 12% of its life left in it. So the idea behind pavement management is to find trigger points along this line to enact low-cost, preventative maintenance type materials that cost you, not a little money, but cost a lot less than reconstructing pavement, which is what you would be doing when you get into the very poor and failed condition. And so for every dollar you spend in preventative maintenance up towards the good, excellent, and fair conditions, it's going to cost you 70 to 400 times as much to get the same PQI out of that pavement. I know that's kind of a lot of information, but this is kind of the backbone of all pavement management that has been put out over the last 20 or 30 years or so. If we go to the next slide, please. So taking a look at, and these are real world costs, this is actually what we were paying today. If you treat a pavement that is in that fair to excellent category, we're paying $1,200 to $56,000 per lane mile to treat that pavement. When you get down into the middle category, the yellow box there, we're paying $77,000 to $102,000 per lane mile. Not cheap, but when you compare it to the bottom, the red box, those rehabilitation costs are costing us $291,000 to $457,000 per lane mile to rehab. And so to give you some real world costs, if you can envision 112th Avenue from Sheridan to Federal Boulevard in front of Front Range Community College, Fire Station 4, pretty major thoroughfare in our city. So that road is 9.5 lane miles. So if you were to crack seal that roadway, being that it was in fair to excellent condition, it would cost us $12,036 or about to crack seal that road. If we were going to grind it off, what we call a mill and overlay process, that's going to cost $975,000 to do that. If we have to reconstruct 112th Avenue, it's going to cost $4.3 million for that one section of roadway. And keep those numbers in mind as we kind of advance into some of our budgetary numbers and what we're investing in our infrastructure here. So next slide, please. So if you look at this graph here, this is what we've actually invested over the last 3 years, or how many lane miles we have treated, how much money we have spent. We do about 79 lane miles per year. If you remember, 112th is 9.5. If that's the only road that we did, we would only accomplish 9.5 lane miles of treated roadway in a year. And really the goal for us is to do 10% of the network, which would be 113 lane miles per year. And so you can see kind of what we spent there and what we've treated over the last 3 years. You go to the next slide, please. So, and this gives you an idea, just a visual of what some of the preservation treatments that I've been talking about, the lower cost treatments that get you, preserve good pavements and prolong pavement life. So crack sealing is top left. Slurry seal is another one that we do a lot of in the top right. And then chip seal and hot applied chip seal, which is the finished product down on the bottom right-hand corner. Go to the next slide, please. You get into pavement rehabilitation. These are the more robust treatments, grind or mill and overlays. In the top right is hot in place recycling, which we've done a little bit of. And you can vary thickness and vary different characteristics of these strategies, which increase the costs, but obviously significantly more money than the preventative maintenance treatments. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is reconstruction. When we talk about reconstruction, that's literally what it is. We take the existing pavement, take it down into the subgrade, we treat the subgrade, reshape it, and repave it basically from scratch. And all of these pictures in this particular slide are from Nelson Court in the Countryside neighborhood. So next slide, please. So there's a few benchmarks out there that we look to know how we're doing. And as I mentioned in the first slide, we have a replacement value of $600 million. The Federal Highway Authority, which is a federal agency, puts out a little bit of guidance on this. And what they recommend is 2 to 3% of asset value annually invested in maintenance and rehabilitation. So when you look at that, that's $12 to $18 million. And right now we're investing on average about $4.2 million annually, which is less than 1% of the asset value. So we're looking at current path that we're on. We're looking at a decrease in our current PQI, average PQI, which I showed you a few slides back. In 5 years from now, it's going to significantly reduce to 51.7 from 65.6. at the current rate that we're spending. So it kind of reinforces that we are underfunding street maintenance, which coincides with the Federal Highway Authority recommendations. You can go to the next slide, please. So this one is a couple of graphs. So this is the first one, and this is a 10-year history of street maintenance and what we've invested. So this first graph would be if in 2010 we decided, we didn't have the money or we didn't want to invest in street maintenance. And you can see if you follow that red line, had we done that in 2020, we would be down in the 30s. So the money that we spend does make a difference. And it does keep that line moving steadily and slowly downward. So if you go to the next slide, you can see this is actually what we've spent. And each one of those green bars at the bottom represents how much money we've spent. And it's been $38 million since 2010 is what we've invested in street maintenance and street infrastructure. And the red line or the orange line is the kind of the way that our PQI value is trending. So it's steadily and slowly decreasing. And we anticipate at the current rate that we're investing in street maintenance that we'll be at a 51.7 in 2024. So you go to the next one, please. So this is what it would look like if in 2021 we invested another $5.5 million to come up with about $10 million worth of street maintenance per year. And really what that does is reset that curve a little bit, and then it allows us to maintain where we're at currently. It really doesn't change things. $10 million allows you to maintain where we're at right now. You go to the next one, please. So, and this is, these are actual pictures of Westminster streets, and these are in there just to reinforce the importance of street infrastructure. I always feel like nobody appreciates streets and the roads that we drive on until they're in bad condition, and then you appreciate them. And we don't want to be in a position where this is common. Honestly, we had to search for these pictures because they aren't that common now, but they will be more common as our streets continue to deteriorate in their condition. And so I have appendix slides that I won't go through, but I will finish the presentation and open it up for questions if there is any.
All right, Kurt, you're ready for questions at this time?
I am ready, sir.
All right, Mr. DeMont, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just curious. So, like, you are pointing out some pictures of things that aren't, but you believe will be, and trying to understand the historics. Like, so you mentioned we have this program that, allows us to keep very good track of the road condition and, where things are at. And, then you cited kind of the federal guidelines of how much money we should spend. So, and I'm just trying to balance out those two things, because I would imagine that we should be deciding what we're going to spend on our roads based on our records of our own condition versus the Fed saying, here's, roughly what you should spend. Even in my business in IT, it's operations. We often are like, your business is, a $10 million a year business, you should be spending X percent on IT, but that's not always necessarily the case. So I'm just trying to understand, what is it that we actually recommend versus the Fed? Because, that's what I'm really interested in. What is it that you guys think that we need to invest so we don't get to the pictures that you're showing that, we're going to be at if we don't spend right?
Sure. Understand. And so let me make a couple of clarifications there. Number one, the FHWA, the Federal Highway Authority, was just there for guidance. I also cited industry standard, maintaining 10% of your network annually. And then, we have our pavement management program, which forecasts 10 years and beyond of what, your program should look like, could look like. And we run literally hundreds of different scenarios. And what we're looking for is what reverses the trend that we're on of a declining street infrastructure, what stabilizes it, and what reverses it. And so I can tell you that the pavement management program tells us that we need to invest a minimum of $10 million annually just to maintain where we are currently at. If you want to reverse that and start improving conditions, we need to invest 12 million. And I know the reason that the FHWA information is there is it because it confirms what our pavement management system is telling us.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. So I guess then my other question, really to follow up with that, just so I kind of understand where we're at. You had kind of shown like the last 10 years. I'm curious, has there been a trend that has changed that has taken us on a downward? Have, you know, historically we've done a good job of keeping up so that we have a good index as far as like the road conditions? And if something did change, when did it change? And, you know, how do we kind of reverse it? I'm just trying to understand, is this, have we been on a bad trajectory for a long time? Or is this something that has kind of popped up, or is it due to growth? You know, or have, you know, we not done historically a good job of keeping up with it? That's kind of what I'm trying to understand.
So, Mr.
Sure.
DeMont, let me help you with that, Kurt.
Go ahead.
We have typically never spent even half of what the Public Works Department has typically asked for, because we just simply didn't have the money. But this goes back 20 plus years. Under the construction guidelines that Kurt mentioned, our pavement management plan, they lay out a scenario of what we should be investing, but we are no different than any other community in the metro area. There's not a community in the metro area that I'm aware of that spends half of what has been recommended by their Public Works Department because it's strictly budget constraints. Kurt, do you have something you want to add?
Well, before he does, I think that that's kind of what I was trying to get at, Mr. Mayor, is we always have the balance of you know, what we would like to do, what we absolutely need to do. So I'm just trying to understand how we get in that sweet spot, and I understand that's, you know, consistently a balancing act that we have to do both as a city and as a council to make sure that we're prioritizing right. So I'm trying to get to that so that we know where that sweet spot is, so that we are providing, you know, what we have traditionally. I think I've lived here my whole life, and I think for the most part we've done a pretty good job. Granted, there's always that road that people, you know, complain about because we don't have money to fix everything, to the mayor's point. So, you know, I'm trying to understand the best path forward, understanding that that balancing act is going to continue into the future just like it has in the past.
Kurt, go back to slide 10. I think that'll help some. Matt, if you're running the slides, can you go back to number 10?
The only thing that I might add is, you know, when you look at revenue sources for not only Westminster, but pretty much the entire country, a lot of us are reliant on federal gas tax funds. And those gas tax funds, you know, haven't been and aren't currently producing enough money to maintain the infrastructure that is out there. So
That's my.
Go ahead.
Kurt,
Sorry,
I
Mr.
made
Mayor.
a mistake saying, I said 10-year, it said slide 10. It should be the 10-year slide, not slide 10.
Yeah, so that would be, Matt, it'd be slide 13. If you run through, it's the second graph on slide 13.
Councilor DeMott, this is Max Kirschbaum. While that slide is coming up, if I could just add, I think you make an excellent point. And if you look at the recent trend of our spending, we have been on an incline. We are moving in a better direction, as this slide would show. But I think what Kurt was trying to say is, you know, at the rate of investment we're at, we're still seeing a decline in that PQI, and that trend at this rate will continue unless we are able to nearly double that level of investment, which would allow us to bend that curve the other way.
Dave, I think you got your own mute.
Thanks. I think that what you're saying makes sense, Max, and I think I understand it. And I guess I'm just trying to also weigh it out. And I guess one of the other real realities that we're going to have to deal with is where COVID ends up leaving us, because that's less, you know, we don't know what that's going to do. And so when you talk about us, you know, over the last 10 years, been doing a good job of trying to bend that curve the other way, you know, who knows what we're going to be able to do in the next 3 years. So it'll be interesting to see where that discussion goes, because I see that you actually have the next couple years laid out for us. But you know, just even to our discussions over the last couple of weeks, we're not even going to budget for next year this time, or for 2 years. I mean, we're going to do a 1-year budget because we don't know where that's going to leave us. So, but it's very interesting, and I appreciate the presentation, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could you go back to Councilor DeMott answered one of my questions about how we prioritize these projects. So thank you for staff for working through that. My other question is, you had mentioned to note values when you were going through the 112th reconstruction and what that would look like on each tier. Could you please go through that again?
Sure. So 112th Avenue is 9.5 lane miles. So if we were to crack seal that roadway, just to perform a crack seal, we would pay about $12,036. Okay, and if we were to overlay that roadway, and that's to, you know, grind off the surface and replace it with a 2-inch asphalt overlay, the cost for that would be $975,108.
Okay.
And then the cost to reconstruct that roadway would be $4,345,000. $345,000.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for your time.
Yep, thank you.
And Kurt, on those numbers that you just quoted to Councilor Smith, those are based on current cost of asphalt. Is that correct?
That's correct. Those are our actual prices from 2020.
Okay. Ms. Sykes, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have just a few. I was wondering if we had the number of lane miles that are below that 40 PQI, so that are already kind of in that higher cost to treat.
I do have it, but I don't have it with me at the moment. I can get that to you.
Okay. Do you roughly know, is it a pretty large number or is it minimal?
No. So when we're talking about, are you specifically asking about roads that are below a certain point, below 40 or something?
Yes. So you showed us kind of the cost of repair at that top tier, the middle tier where we're at right now, where most of us are in fair. And then there was under that 40 threshold, it looked like the price kind of goes up an order of magnitude. And I was just wondering, where are we at with that lowest threshold? Is that a significant problem?
So about 20% of our roads are below that threshold right now.
Okay. Is that spread throughout the city, or is that tend to be in our older portion of our community?
I don't think it's not in one specific section of the city. It is throughout. I mean, you'll have some in the north, south, some in the west. It varies.
Mm-hmm. So I don't want to misstate this. Am I correct that when roads get into bad conditions, not only you've done a great job illustrating that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, but it actually can impact the pocketbooks of our residents, right? When their car hits a pothole, it can impact the cost of their car maintenance and repair. Is that right, or am I overstating that?
That's absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm. I also think it was really helpful that you showed the citizen survey that showed that this is something that both people think is very important and also pretty fair. Not only did we get that, qualitative or quantitatively, but getting that qualitatively from our residents. So I found that really helpful. I guess looking at this, I started to get worried, thinking maybe we had on my term in council not funded as much as we had in the past. So it was helpful to see that slide that showed actually we had been increasing funding steadily since 2014. I know it dipped a little bit, it looked like in 2020, but still well above traditional funding for it. But it just feels like this is one of those things where if we don't stay on top of it, we are going to be kicking the can down the road for a future council that will be in really bad shape. So I'm really supportive of us making sure that as much as we can, and to the mayor and to Dave's point, obviously there's a limited budget, and right now with everything going on, we don't really know what that's going to look like, but I appreciate the presentation and do support making sure that we fund this at a level that we're not kicking a very expensive problem down the road. You did mention something that sparked a question for me in regards to gas tax. Can you explain how that's going to impact us here locally?
I don't think anybody knows, exactly what the gas tax revenues are going to do, especially with the COVID-19. Obviously there's a huge discrepancy with the amount of fuel that's being used today versus 6 months ago. But those do make up about 30% of our revenues that we use for street maintenance. So that's going to be an impact that we're going to have to address.
Oh, wow. Thank you for kind of letting us know about that so we can monitor it. So thank you very much for this presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Ms. Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I want to thank you, Kurt, for this great presentation. When I was out walking last summer and visiting with residents, I often heard about the problems of our roads, their concerns, wondering what kind of a replacement or amending program we had. And one of the things that I've recognized as a citizen is that we do have a program, and I appreciate that program. But I do have some questions. How often do we end up completely replacing a road, like tearing it completely apart and resurfacing it?
So realistically, the goal of pavement management is to never do that. The idea would be to use the pavement that's there and continually preserve it, seal it, resurface it over and over and over. But in a perfect world, that's how it would work. Realistically, if we don't manage our pavements and preserve our pavements, you're looking at probably a 25 to 30 year lifespan, and they're going to need to be replaced completely from bottom up.
And do we have any kind of restrictions on weight of vehicles or number of trucks or commercial vehicles that go through our city?
Currently, I am not aware of any weight restricted roadways in the city.
And do we have any, I know some cities have like specific truck routes through their cities so that the majority of the wear and tear goes on those streets rather than on our local streets. Do we have anything like that?
As far as I know, there are no designated truck routes in Westminster either.
Okay. And obviously, we would recommend to our residents to do what they can to reduce traffic in our city. Do we put educational materials up on our website that might address what we can do as citizens? Because the reality is this is all of our problem, and everybody needs to have a part in trying to make sure that we keep our roads safe, whole, in good shape. What can we do as citizens to really work toward that end that will save the city money, especially in light of the fact that as we see people, cars are obviously becoming better every year, and so consequently we have to fill the tanks a little less, which one lends to not receiving enough gas money to pay for the roads, but also with maybe people going remote here in the future after COVID, we also may find that we don't have to fill our cars as much. Again, going to lower how much money we have that we can put toward those roads. What are some things that we can do to help the city as citizens to ensure that our roads stay in good shape?
You know, the things that dramatically impact the roadways. Yes, traffic plays a factor. Passenger cars really don't have that big of an impact on our roadways. The vehicles that have big impacts on our roadways are the heavy trucks, the garbage trucks, the tractor trailers, the school buses. All those kind of heavy axle vehicles are what inflict damage on our roadways. And that's a tough one. I mean, especially now with people ordering Amazon, UPS, FedEx, all those trucks on our roadways definitely takes a toll on our roads that maybe we didn't have that issue a few years ago. So I don't know that I have any words of advice that residents can help, but you know, obviously keeping in mind that those vehicles are the ones that really cause the damage to our roadways is think about how you order stuff. Think about the trash company that you select and those kind of things that, you know, minimizes the vehicles that are on our roads of that size.
If a resident has a situation where the road perhaps in front of their house is not up to par or they're concerned about its safety, do we have a place that they can call in the city that would maybe trigger we need to get out there and do something about the road?
Oh, absolutely. So they can call street operations, they can do Access Westminster, they can email us. And, you know, we have our own staff, our street maintenance staff that go out all year round and fix failed areas and try and improve safety and conditions of roadways. You know, the big ticket items, the repaving projects are done contractually. Our in-house street division crews take care of those kind of items.
Well, I certainly appreciate the work of yourself and your team. You know, my fellow counselors have addressed that money may be a concern here with COVID and recent events. And so we want to fund, I would like to see us fund above and beyond so that we could improve our road system, but understanding that our funds may be restricted here, we will certainly support you in any way we can, as much as we possibly can, without putting burden on the system. But thank you for your presentation. It was very well done.
Thank you so much, Councilor Scully.
Before I start back around with the second round of questions from council, is anybody who has not had an opportunity to ask a question that would like to at this time? Mr. Demont, you had a follow-up question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually was just going to ask Dawn if we could get these slides emailed to us from the presentation. And a point to follow up on Councilor Scully's ask of what residents can do. I would certainly encourage them to shop local, especially right now for the businesses who can be operating. That obviously is what feeds our tax base and allows us to fix our roads. So.
The sites.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I had meant to mention this earlier. I was discussing, and this is a true story, but I was discussing, I think I used the wrong term. I used slurry seal to a resident, and they were talking about how much they hate it. And I actually found a video, and it's, I believe, from the Los Angeles Public Works Department, but that goes over what slurry seal is and how much it saves the community and how it really it basically extends the life of the streets. And it was such a great video. I just wanted to highlight it in case our communication and outreach department ever wanted to do something similar, because I do remember years ago a presentation where we heard from the streets department from Kurt that people can sometimes not like it, but it is such a lifesaver for our roads. So maybe proactively explain that to our residents would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
And one of the things I wanted to go back to with Kurt's comments, if you start at the lowest level with crack seals, overlays, slurry, chip seals, and you do all of this, that helps, as Kurt indicated, getting to the benefit of not having to do that last step. And the more we can put into it, the better. And we've had these conversations, as we indicated, for a number of years. But the big thing it comes down to is, where do we get the money from? As I indicated earlier, there's not a city in the metro area that's putting anywhere near, and some of them tried last year to increase their budgets, but now they're going to have to go back again and look at them. One of the things that we know we're not going to see, and we talked about this last week when I indicated the two big transportation bills that had been in the state legislature are both going to die this year. So that, again, that's another issue of us not being able to get the opportunity to raise money to increase our transportation investments. And whether it's through a tax increase or a gas tax increase, as Mr. DeMont pointed out, people are not driving as much. And the gas tax, we don't have the ability to raise at a local level. It's a state. There is no effort by the state to raise it, nor by the feds, and especially with the times that we're in today. So one of the things that's going to be an issue that we'll have to deal with, Mr. Dorr and his team are working to present with us later this year a 1-year budget instead of the typical 2-year. But as all the council has expressed, the fact is right now we don't know where we're at budget-wise or what we can expect to have available to us for the rest of the year. Some of the funds that we've had to expend that we were not planning to expend with the COVID-19 will come back to us through the CARES Act. We'll be able to get recovery of some of that. But that doesn't mean it's going to all go into one place, because we still have the overall economic impact to the city. Is there any other questions on Kurt's presentation from any of the council members? All right, not seeing any additional questions, Max, for you and Kurt and the team. Appreciate the work you've done on this, and I know you're anxiously awaiting, just like everybody is, where do we stand budget-wise so we know what to spend, because no matter what we spend, we can't spend enough in a 2 or 3 year period to get us back to the level we'd like to be. So I appreciate the work you guys are doing and trying to keep us as well in repair as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Tripp, between you and Mr. Frankel and staff, can we move on to the second item?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, I'll introduce it. On February 3rd, when we had a conversation about the potential for charter amendments, a Tabor question, and cleanup of the existing charter, and some other specific issues such as award system and how that might be placed on a ballot, we've had a lot happen. And staff has continued, though, to work on this. And as we promised to bring it back for your discussion, let me just say, first of all, we're looking tonight for your policy direction. This is within your realm. This is certainly not mine. I'm here to provide with the staff information for you and resources. When we assessed and looked at this, I asked the staff to make a recommendation to me as to what they thought we should or needed to move forward. And everyone who participated in that is here this evening, primarily represented by Dave Frankel, your city attorney, and our staff, including Chris Lindsay, who looked at the policy aspect and the efforts that would be necessary to put these forward. But I'll reiterate that we're here to listen to you tonight, take direction, and move forward with your and execute your will. I'll stop and turn it to any of the team that wants to jump in now. Maybe City Attorney Frankel would like to make some comments. I know he's had a staff member, Matt Munch, who's done a lot of heavy lifting on this. But Dave or Matt, would you like to make any opening comments?
Thanks, Don. This is Dave Frankel. I would definitely turn to Matt Munch, who met with you, City Council, on February 3rd, along with Chris Lindsay. And I think that Matt and Chris are perhaps best able to answer the questions that you may have tonight.
Mr. Munch, would you or Mr. Lindsay like to start? Go ahead.
Very much. This is Matthew Munch, Assistant City Attorney. As you may recall, last time we met, we had a list of potential charter amendments that may or may not have been something that the City Council was interested in pursuing. I believe we got some direction on some of them, and were requested to come back with a little more information on others. I know Chris Lindsay has been really, despite the generous words from my boss, I think Chris Lindsay has really done the heavy lifting on this. So Chris, I'd turn it over to you if you don't mind that cop out.
Thanks, Matt, and good evening again, Mayor and City Council. This is Chris Lindsay, Assistant City Manager. So we last spoke with you about potential charter amendments and some other items on February 3rd. Staff took that feedback at that time and has come back tonight with a set of recommendations that we do not take lightly. In response to the COVID-19 outbreak, we reviewed each item that we had on the list in terms of criticality and the use of resources as we move forward. And I'm going to go through a list quickly here of those recommendations. First, staff recommends delaying the housekeeping charter amendments to a future year. We believe that staff has found a way to implement current policies and practices to ensure that we can continue to operate. In addition to that, council directed staff to draft an advisory question that is attached. I appreciate the city attorney's office working on that. Staff recommends the city council delay any action on this item at this time. Much of this is based on a review of the utilization of resources and our existing resources and ongoing sustainability are quite vulnerable at the moment due to the impacts that are happening outside the walls of City Hall. Staff is and will continue to devote significant time and energy to maintaining public health and safety, ensuring economic recovery and vitality, supporting our community, spending the CARES funds that we talked about during the special meeting this evening, implementing innovative strategies to save money, and doing all this while under a strategic hiring freeze. In reviewing these items, staff believes that additional resources to run this advisory question and to implement will require a significant amount of staff time, legal advice, significant community outreach, public meetings and education of our community to make sure we do this right and do this well. And that's just in the short term. We believe that if this is passed, there will be significant legal, consulting, and technical help, and a tremendous amount of staff time in potentially drafting future charter amendments if this advisory question is approved. As the memo outlines, staff does not believe it's prudent to undertake this measure at this time. And lastly, just want to touch on the Tabor initiatives. Staff recommends delaying further discussion around Tabor revenue questions until later this summer to allow us to gain more insight into the financial picture and the state of affairs of city finances and the outside economy. And with that, I and staff would open for questions and comments and look forward to the discussion.
Mr. Demont, you had a question.
I actually don't have questions. I have comments. I appreciate the work that's been put into this, and it looks like, as far as I'm fine with staff recommendation on everything except for the advisory question. The way that this was laid out in our discussions when we went through this was really to be an advisory question, because it may require no work, because the people may come back and say, you know, we don't want this. But the reality is I think that it is worth the time and effort and the work if they do come back and say yes, because that's, you know, the will of the people. And I like the way that this is set up, and this is phrased to be an advisory question, much like I stated when we talked back in February, that I thought that was one of the real wise things that the council did before my time with the advisory question for collective bargaining. And I think that, you know, that putting it out as a question to the people is the right thing to do. And it sounds like much of the work would be if it gets approved, and that would be in the future. But I've been through 4 elections since I've been involved, 3 of which I was part of, 1 of which I've been on council and was on the sidelines watching. This question has come up every single time. I think that we're beyond the time that this question deserves to be asked by the electorate and be answered, so then we can decide what that looks like moving forward. And at this point, it's just a simple asking the people whether or not they want this. And, you know, even through COVID, I've had this come up as a question from residents about what we're going to do with this. So my preference would be for us to push forward. I think it would be worth the spend and time, since I don't think much of that is going to happen this year. And, you know, again, I think the people deserve to get to give their input and say whether or not this is something they even want.
Mr. Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too have heard from residents on this issue and continue to. And I believe that at the study session on February 3rd, we had a outstanding discussion amongst council regarding stepping back and versus taking arbitrary, creating wards districts on our own, and look at it from a time and expense standpoint and saying, do a majority of our residents want this? And I feel that this advisory question, I like the way it's written. It gives the, if there is an approval, it gives a little broader scope rather than having come back on other issues of finance later. And it gives our residents that opportunity for an up or down, and then at that point we move forward. But to delay it further, we're looking at another several years. So I would be in favor of the advisory issue. Thank you.
Ms. Smith. Ms. Smith, I think you're muted. There you go. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you walk me through what the outreach piece with the public would look like if this is only an advisory question that we're offering to the public?
This is Matthew Munch. If I understand the question, it's essentially a matter of once this is on the ballot, what can the city do for outreach regarding the question itself?
Well, it sounded like from Mr. Lindsay that there were some outreach tactics in order to even get it on the ballot. Is that what I understood, or did I misunderstand?
Councillor Smith, yes, that's correct. I think an advisory commission, and as we've talked about this, advisory question, and as staff has discussed this, we believe education, public outreach, meetings can help inform the public as to the pros and cons of the question. And I believe in talking with the attorney's office, the city can undertake efforts to inform, but not to propose one side or the other.
Okay.
And that is correct. We do.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Munch, go ahead.
We do think that the Fair Campaign Practices Act would apply here, even though it's just an advisory question. It's not the sort of thing that you want to mess around with or take risks with, that is to say the government interfering in a question. So the city council would be able to pass a resolution either supporting or opposing the question, and the city could do all the normal things it would do with regards to publishing unbiased information about what the question does and does not mean. But the city resources would not be able to be used to advocate for or against. Obviously, individual city council members retain their First Amendment rights in their individual capacity to speak for or against it, but the city council as a body would not be able to advocate for or against, nor would any city council member be allowed to speak for the city council or the city on the matter. Advocacy by staff or city council would have to be in individual capacities.
Thank you. And what can you walk me through those pros and cons of, I guess, what it would take to get it on the ballot? Because those were unclear to me. I understand that we're kind of facing a predicament with outreach with our residents face to face. But I think we've been doing a fair job as far as getting out our city editions. And I think that with our social media campaigns that we've had going on, I think we've been doing a good job of that kind of outreach. So can you walk me through, I guess, more of the cons of why staff has come to the decision to postpone it with that in mind?
Thank you for the
From a
question.
legal standpoint,
Matt, why don't you go first?
from a legal standpoint, getting it on the ballot is not terribly complicated. The city council can place this on the ballot merely by passing the ordinance. The logistical questions come in, I think Chris Lindsay and Michelle Parker can answer as to what it means to actually put this on a ballot, to have the election, to participate in the election, and the costs that is going to incur.
Councillor Smith, from a policy level, really what we're thinking of is that there's a full plan here that's needed to outreach and communicate and educate. And right now, staff is focused on response to COVID-19, and we don't see that changing in the near-term future. And what we're talking about is focusing those efforts, continuing to focus those efforts on COVID-19.
Okay. So with all the information that you've presented, because you're right, I do feel that we're going to be in this for a while. But my fear is that if we push this off, it's going to be another something that we might have to kick again. And so I would encourage staff to, all of us, to keep moving forward on this, because it has, as Councillor Demott had mentioned, it has been a topic of interest from just personally from what I've heard from residents on a continual basis. I've ran 2 times now, and it's been a item of discussion in a lot of different capacities. So my support would be to go forward with this, and with an understanding that it will take some effort from staff and time away from other things, but I think it's important enough that we're just asking an advisory question that it could potentially take us to taking us to a committee or not. I do have one last question. I don't know if anyone would know. Do we know what numbers we're at for the census data on who has responded for Westminster? And if not, that's fine. I'd be just curious to know from a survey perspective where we're at on our numbers for the census and gathering that information as well.
I'm not aware of where we are on census response rates. I think if there's no one on staff that can answer that, we'll be glad to get that back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mr. Munch, I want to follow up on Ms. Smith's comments. I'm not sure, as you indicated, that we would be able to use most of the social media and print materials that would may be construed as promoting one side or the other of the issue. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are correct, sir. We would not be able to promote and send things out advocating, hey, you should vote for this or you should vote against it. This a good idea, this is a bad idea. I don't suppose there would be anything wrong with you simply informing people that the question is on the ballot. But again, we'd want to step very carefully. It wouldn't be the worst idea in the world to have the city attorney's office look at the communications before they go out to make sure that they're not violating the Fair Campaign Practices Act. For the most part, like any other ballot question, the city would largely put it on the ballot and stay out of it.
All right. Ms. Scully, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of my questions were actually answered with Councilor Demont and Councilor Smith, but I did have a question about, so my understanding is that, I guess originally my understanding was actually that we were more concerned about if it passed, what the work would involve beyond that as far as moving a campaign forward. But actually in listening to your answer to Councilor Smith, it sounds like you're actually very concerned about the bandwidth of having to campaign for or against, or this very statement being put on the ballot. Is that correct?
So I believe in the
There is. Go ahead, Chris.
So I believe in the short run, before November, we're concerned about education and outreach and the level of commitment there. Beyond that, I think, yes, we are very concerned about the level of staff resources and monetary resources this will take in terms of hiring consultants, technical legal advice. We continue to have discussions at a staff level at how much this could cost and how long it would take. And we honestly don't have the expertise at a staff level to answer that question. This is incredibly complex work to come up with a system to do wards, to draw district boundaries across 2 county lines, to spread populations between those, come up with rules and regulations. And yeah, we believe the resource commitment will be great in the short term and greater in the long term to implement.
So I
It should be noted as.
Go ahead.
As I said, it does actually, it will cost some amount of money and some resources merely to put this on the ballot. Just getting the election undertaken is going to cost a certain amount of money and a certain amount of staff time, even without any sort of advocacy. And of course, we'd have to tread very careful with the advocacy. What we have heard is that should this pass, the expertise required for this sort of district drawing and district management is something that is not only not in-house, but is fairly difficult and fairly expensive to come by. So if this passes, it could be quite resource intensive.
So you're saying that's a cost beyond the $60,000 that was included in this packet just to be considered on the ballot?
I couldn't speak to the specifics of that, but that 60,000 is certainly worth considering at this particular time in history. And yes, there might be additional costs that I'm not aware of.
And I was curious, so it says approximately $60,000 for consolidated election expenses. I'm unclear as to what that $60,000 would cost. Is that just what it costs to put something on a ballot? That seems like a lot of money just to put a question on the ballot.
Councilor Scully, I'm going to ask if City Clerk Michelle Parker could give us a little insight into that number.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thanks for the question, Councilor Scully. You're absolutely right. That is about what it costs to put an item on the ballot. Just to give you a little bit of information so that you can compare. In 2016, when we put the item on the ballot for, this is one item, no other items on the ballot, for both counties, our total expenses exceeded $55,000. Part of the reason why it was that low is because we pay a portion to the counties based on voter turnout, also based on how many other jurisdictions join the ballot, how many questions they have, and it's apportioned accordingly. So the $60,000 could could be less, it could also be more. In 2017, which is an off year, we had our council elections, which ran in excess of $75,000. So again, that is a best guess, but it is, I would say, a pretty accurate best guess based on having one question on a ballot in a presidential year.
Okay, that does help. But to clarify, we actually, if it were to pass, foregoing the expenses that it would take just to get it on the ballot, which is at a minimum 60,000, but probably would be more because there would be additional costs for somewhat of a campaign. Then if it is passed, then there's additional costs of hiring a consultant and having a task force and having to educate the community. And we don't have any ideas on that kind of cost yet.
That's correct, Councilor Scully.
Okay. All right. Well, you've been very helpful and I really appreciate it. It's a lot to consider, and I appreciate your expertise in guiding us and helping us to understand what is at risk here. Thank you.
Are there other questions from the council before we start our second round? All right, back to you, Mr. Demont.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple things. This is a question for Mr. Lindsay. The cost that you're stating, though, like a couple things. Mr. Munch said that we can't really promote it, and so are you anticipating costs this year to promote it, or are you just saying about like FAQs and what are the rules about? And the other thing, before you answer that question, we don't even know how we would do it. Right now, we're saying we want to ask the question. So a lot of the information that would be put out, I would imagine, would be after the fact that we got an answer that the public came back and said, yeah, we want to do that. I mean, is that a fair statement? And how does that really play out through all this?
So thank you for the question, Councilor Demott. I think the public's going to look to city sources for, why this question's on the ballot. What does it mean to me, and what are pros and cons? And I think staff would like to engage in some sort of outreach campaign to educate on that.
I imagine, though, that that's going to be limited about what you could do. I mean, I guess my whole thing is everything you're saying is valid, but it's going to be valid in 2 years. It was valid 2 years ago, and there's going to be a cost to it no matter when we do it. And I think the question that I would ask my colleagues to really ask yourself is, if you think it's worth doing 2 years ago or 2 years from now, I think that the people that have been asking for this throughout elections deserve the question to be asked. I think it's the cost of doing local government, and I think it's important enough that we spend the money, because to me it sounds like these are all things that are going to have to play out no matter when we do it, and I'd hate to see us kick the can on this another election cycle. So I guess that's all my comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Sykes.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my colleagues. For all of you that were paying attention to the conversation that my colleagues and I had about this months back, I was supportive of at least having the threshold question. My concern now is setting that kind of expectation management for our residents. So if we do put out a threshold question, and as we said just from the previous discussion, we have no idea what our budget is going to look like. We really don't understand what the full ramifications are going to be on our revenue of COVID-19. It seems almost not irresponsible, but it seems like it could cause some tension and confusion with the community if we were to ask this. The community answered yes, and then we see the amount of time, effort, and expense is something that's beyond our capacity the following year. This is not something to take lightly. I mean, considering up into a charter amendment is a pretty significant change for our community. And I'm kind of wrestling here. Is this the right time to do it? I keep hearing that there's a huge contingent of our population that wants this. I did not receive any emails, even with this on the agenda tonight, asking for this. I have also run 2 times. I've had very limited impact from the broader population about this. I have one group of folks that consistently ask about it, but it isn't, at least with, I mean, and I knocked doors, it wasn't something that I heard shared throughout our community as a burning concern. And it is troubling to me that tonight it wasn't even with the staff recommending to put it on hold, I didn't receive one email from someone concerned about that. And we get emails about everything that people are concerned about. So it doesn't seem to have that pressing nature that my colleagues are describing. Additionally, I'm just wondering, well, I am somewhat on the fence on this because I don't think it hurts to do a check-in with our residents typically, but I just don't think these are typical times. So I guess that's my concerns right now and when I'm thinking this through.
Mr. Voles?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also conflicted now. Back in February 3rd, when we first discussed this, I supported the idea of taking it forward. So my question is the timing of it. Can I ask, maybe David Frankel, our city attorney, be the best one. What is the deadline? What's the absolute latest time we could get this on the ballot? If we don't decide this tonight and we kind of push it to see if there's a possibility to still do it, but maybe we don't know financially where we are yet. And then I'll have another question after that.
Councilor Voles, this is Dave Frankel speaking, and I believe Michelle Parker has the election calendar handy, but my understanding is August is our deadline for the council action in order for the ballot language to be set in September.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. And then I guess this would be for our chief financial officer or someone in the budget area. When will we have a better picture? When's the next window we'll have a better picture of what our finances will look like for the city? How hard this COVID-19 hit our city? When will we know kind of a more clear picture of how bad it really is or not?
Thank you, Councilor Voles. This is Larry Dorr, Chief Financial Officer, Deputy City Manager. Well, we believe that the most significant months due to the stay-at-home orders will be in April and May. Those sales taxes for May will be remitted to the city at the end of June. We'll be able to evaluate those in July. If we are on target, as I've mentioned in some earlier sessions, we believe that that's an impact of nearly $30 million. Of course, that will also continue on into the month of July, but we'll certainly have a better picture in that July-August timeframe. But my sense is that council and the community are going to be learning about a very deep reduction in strategic reserves of the city and some significant financial impacts. So we don't expect that to change, but we do expect to have a better idea of what it looks like relative to our forecast. So now within that July-August timeframe, we'll certainly have more information than we have here in May.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Then I hear about that there would be a public outreach component to this, and that concerns me. I was one counselor for sure who wanted people to have opportunities when we're doing zoning issues and land use issues to actually show up at meetings. So we've kind of pushed some of those back. I feel like it might be a little bit inconsistent in some ways to say now we're in a position where we're going to do community outreach, but we didn't do it on other issues. I feel there might be an inconsistency on council's part kind of in that area. But I guess for me, it boils down to I don't feel like I may not want to make a decision tonight. I supported this, taking this issue to the public, and I just don't know that I have enough information to make that decision to say we can't because of COVID-19. I just don't feel that I have enough information yet to make a decision like that, because I've supported taking this to the public and allowing them to have their voice. So I don't want this to end, but I just don't know if I have enough information tonight to make the decision. So thank you very much. That's all I have to say for now.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just have a quick question, and maybe this is for Larry Dorr. Could you walk me through, or maybe even this is for our legal team, could you walk me through if the CARES Act could play any kind of financial lessening to Westminster if we use those funds to help in other areas that we might need? And then I'll follow up with that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Smith. This is Larry Dorr speaking again. Let's see. And I've got a couple of slides and a more detailed discussion of this coming up. Our funding from Adams County, our first third, will be about $1.8 million. And I've got some guiding principles for the disbursement of those. And primarily, you'll see that those are going to provide for relief and aid directly to members of the community. And then for direct COVID-related expenses that the city is experiencing relative to all manner of new conditions for us to operate our businesses in various different locations across the community. So yes, as you'll see in a moment, I've kind of got some guiding principles, some of which to aid in the general economic recovery of the whole community, help people directly in businesses, and then also some recovery for local government. But I can tell you, based on this total amount that was just relative to the intergovernmental agreement, is a very small percentage of the total impact. If something like a third or 1/5 of the total CARES funds were retained by the city, that wouldn't amount to much more than 10 to 20% of the total financial impact to the city. So unfortunately, there will be some mitigation of the financial impact to the city due to CARES, but it's going to be a small fraction. Unfortunately, it's still anticipated the city will have to use significant strategic reserves to continue its operations through this COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. And let's say that we were in this situation. Would we have been able to budget for this request if we had moved forward, if we are moving forward?
So I'll ask Chris Lindsay if he knows the details of whether or not this $60,000 that Ms. Parker spoke of is currently in the budget or not, or if it would require an additional appropriation. Mr. Lindsay, would you address whether that would be attached to an action of council to have a ballot question?
Thank you.
Chris, hang on just a second. Councilor Seymour, could you mute your mic, please? Thank you. All right, Mr. Lindsay, try to go again.
Councilor Smith, there's not an existing appropriation in the budget to pay for this. Staff had previously identified that we would use the contingency within the general fund to pay for this election cost.
Okay. Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you so much.
Ms. Scully?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just have some follow-up questions. I was really listening to what my peer counselors and Mayor Pro Tem were saying. And so I guess one of my concerns is that we are making this we are having this conversation. We don't really have a lot of input from our community, and we're not in a place where we can have that input. And I'd like to have that input. So I would be more comfortable having this conversation when we are back in chambers. I foresee that probably will be happening soon in maybe June or July before this has to go on the ballot. And I would certainly be more comfortable perhaps waiting until then to make this decision when we've clearly seen where we are fiscally. We've heard from some of our constituents, and we have the ability to make a more educated decision in light of the current situation. I do have a question. Very often we go to a public hearing. Is this one of those issues that could go to a public hearing where we could encourage public to give us some input?
Mr. Munch.
If you're talking about trying to get public input on whether or not you would like to pass an ordinance putting this on the ballot,
Yeah.
it just,
Is it not a?
I suppose if the purpose is to listen to the public, I don't particularly see any reason why not. But again, you'd want to be careful about not taking a position for or against it as a body. But instead, individuals can be individual city council members speaking in their individual capacities. If that makes sense.
I do understand your point. I'll have to think it over in my head a little bit, because I do think that it would be important to have some advisement from our constituents on the direction. How are they comfortable? I mean, we are still in the thick of COVID. People are at this point really living at the first level of the Maslow hierarchy, just trying to figure out where their next meal is coming from, if they're going to be able to pay rent, will they have a job? And I don't want to put more burden on a community that is really recovering from a situation of disaster. And so my feeling would be is that I'm not very comfortable making this choice tonight. I might be more comfortable in June or July. Thank you.
Mr. Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Wasn't sure if we lost you or not. Go ahead.
It was an organizer thing. I think there was noise in the background, but thank you. Just some comments. We had back to the discussion that we had in February, and at that time it was my recollection that we thought this was a excellent idea, and that there was enough input that we had each received individually. And if I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, and I do apologize, but I believe this was a question at 2 of the forums in this last election. So it was a topic at that time. And for those who follow council and are concerned about this issue and listen to the study session from February 3rd, they may have had a belief that it was moving forward on that. In regards to the cost, I think we have to weigh the cost of representative democracy in the greater sense in this. Is that, do we wish to spend $250,000 on a landscaping consultant, or do we wish to spend $50,000 to put a question before our citizens so that they then can make a decision during a time that in November, when they're used to making those kind of decisions, and that ballot goes to every single one of their kitchen tables. And so I think that delaying this bumps us out even further. And as far as I can see on the question, there isn't a definitive timeline for the completion of that after, if there is a positive vote on that. We do need to set those expectations. And I do not feel that we would need to have any significant outreach, or should we have outreach other than the elections coming up? Here's the ballot issue. I believe that that comes from groups separate and distinct from anyone in the city or city council officially. So I once again reiterate that I believe that we have the wherewithal, and we have had the input of our citizens, and don't need to re-poll for the poll. Thank you.
Mr. Demott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One other thing that I'm just thinking I would mention to basically engagement of an election. You're not going to have a chance at another election that's going to have that kind of engagement this November is going to have for another 4 years. You know, the fact that it's a presidential election, especially with everything going on, I think that you're going to have a very engaged electorate who is going to be very interested in what's on their ballot. So I think we actually have a unique circumstance in that fact. So I hope that if you can't get on board with it tonight, that you'll agree by July that the voters having their say on this makes sense this year.
Are there other comments from the council members? Ms. Seitz?
Hi. So I just want to clarify. I don't think any of my colleagues that are hesitant about putting it on the ballot right now mean for any other reason than the fact that the entire landscape has changed beneath us, and we really are not sure what's going to happen with our revenues next year. I would like a little more time to think about it. I did talk about how I had initially been against wards and districts because personally I was concerned that it would lead to parochialism or where people would worry just about their ward or district and not look at the city's priorities as a whole, but that it had evolved. But I want to be clear, we have not done polling on this. There hasn't been a poll that asked if people wanted wards and districts that I'm aware of. And secondly, we did not, I believe Catherine Scully, Councilor Scully, sent one email that was sent to her individually. But I get lots of emails on most topics that we're talking about. I have not received any directly to me on this topic, which makes me wonder how large of a contingent is this really an issue for in our community. Doesn't mean we don't want to always work to increase representation and also diversity of elected office. I'm just wondering, my concern about this is simply the timing.
All right, I'm going to ask for a last call from the comments from the council. I'll give you a couple of seconds to see if anybody else wants to jump in. Mr. DeMott, you have a closing question or comment?
Just a quick comment. I'm surprised that Mayor Pro Tem Seitz hasn't heard the same kind of feedback that I've heard through the campaigns, because I know that she campaigned hard and went to lots of doors, just like a lot of the rest of us did. But I have heard it, and I've heard it as recently as today. I was on a phone call with somebody. We heard it going into when we had the discussion in February. I got a lot of phone calls about it back in February, hence why I asked a week ago if we could figure out where we were on this discussion. Because somebody asked me, said, hey, where are you guys with that discussion? And frankly, I'll be honest, I was kind of like, oh yeah, we were talking about that, because I, like most of you, have been thinking about all the other things that are going on. So I think that it's clear that some of us.
Excuse me, Councilor DeMott. I apologize for interrupting everybody. I just got a notice that Councilor Scully is off the call, and I think you probably want all members of the body to hear your comments. So I just wanted to pause it until she can get back on. I apologize.
Yeah, I just got the text message from her that she lost connection. So just everybody, we're going to take a short break, and as soon as we know everybody's back on, we'll come back on. So don't go anywhere. Ms. Parker, as soon as you can determine that Councilor Scully's back on and connected to us, will you let us know?
I have just converted her over to a panelist, and I am showing her. But Councilor Scully, if you could confirm that you have rejoined the call, please. And I'm also showing that you are muted if you're attempting to make any comment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Are you back on again?
I'm back on. I had to change computers.
Okay. Mr. DeMott, you want to start your final comments? Go over again.
Sure. So basically, the point I was making is that a lot of us have heard this at a lot of doors over time. I'm not sure why some of us heard it and some of us didn't, but I know there's at least 3 of us who have stated that we heard it at doors. I heard it in this last election cycle, I heard it at forums. So, I mean, there is a desire out there to have this question answered. Maybe not everybody's on board with it, much like in 16, when you guys asked the question about collective bargaining, not everybody voted yes on that. There was, I believe it was 60+%. There was a good majority of the city that said they did want that, but it went to the right place. It went to the electorate. So, you know, I think that obviously some people are hearing other things than what the whole body is hearing, but there's enough of us hearing this that we made this a point that we wanted to ask the question to the people. And you know, that's what I left February with. I hope that we get to do that sooner rather than later, because I don't believe that this is anything but being driven by the fact that some of us heard this quite a few times from the residents of Westminster.
Ms. Seitz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a genuine question. Have we, and I apologize if I cannot recall this, have we had any citizens submit a partial petition on this to us ever? Because we keep comparing it to the firefighter situation, and in that we actually were presented a petition, and then they had started efforts to do a citizen initiative on the ballot. So, I mean, there was ample desire and effort going on before we made that decision to refer it to the ballot. And so I'm just asking, and this is not like a got to, I genuinely don't recall if we've received a petition like that.
Ms. Parker, can you answer that? Hang on just a minute.
So I can't say right now, I can get back to you and do some research if we have ever received a petition on this subject. However, I can tell you that since at least 2015, we have not.
All right, Mr. DeMont.
I would just add that part of the time that I heard about this recently was a group of citizens who were saying that they'd like to petition it. And so those some of those residents or just a few of, but not all of, the ones who have asked me about having this question brought up in council. So I don't know if it's ever got to that point or not, but I can tell you that there is at least some people in the city who have talked about doing this on their own. I think even some of those questions have at some point been addressed to the clerk's office to ask how they would get a petition on the ballot.
All right, Ms. Seitz, did you finish your question?
I did, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Voles.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say that I have said before that I support asking the voters of Westminster this question. My concern, I think, is timing. Is this the right time to do it in the middle of a pandemic? Will we have the right public outreach? I'm just a little bit concerned about that. But as far as having the voters answer this question, I think it's important. I think, you know, put it out there and we'll see what the voters tell us. And I support that. My concern right now, though, is timing right in the middle of, are people paying attention to this? Or so I'm a little bit conflicted based just what we're living through right now with the pandemic. So that's, I guess, where I come down on it. I don't want to see it go away, and I don't know if we set a date certain or we into June we talk about this again, but I think we should. Thank you.
All right, council, do you have any other comments? From my standpoint, I'm like some of the other council members. I know that this has been brought up by a very small group of people, and it's typically the same ones. I have run a number of campaigns here that has not been a focus of any of those campaigns that it's been there. Yes, I'm aware that in some of the forums last year that question came up, but I am not hearing a large number of the public saying that this is something that they want to bring forward. My concern is not only, like Councilor Bowles just talked about, is the timing of this, but I think it's very important that we understand this is not just a $60,000 put on the ballot. Anything we do is going to require time away from stuff that we're working on at the city from the city staff standpoint to support even getting the question raised and getting it onto the ballot is taking time. The staff has indicated that they are stretched very thin, trying to deal with keeping the city alive and working. I'm not ready at this point to tell the staff that I want you to take and reprioritize this issue at this time over what we need to do to get the city back up and running as quick as we can. I don't have a problem revisiting this when we have seen a better input from our financial standpoint, our workload standpoint, probably in the July timeframe. But where I'm at tonight is I would not support moving this forward tonight. Now, what I'm going to ask is for each council member to tell us so that we have a clear direction to staff if we want to move this forward now or delay and come back in the July timeframe when we have a better understanding where we are financially and workload wise. So the question is really, do you want to move forward now or come back in July and take another look at this as to where we are then? Ms. Parker, so that we don't miss anybody, I would ask you to roll call this and ask for direction from the staff, or I'm sorry, council.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, and just to be absolutely clear, we are calling a yes/no question on should we reconsider this in June or July?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I will start with Councilor Demott.
My preference is to go forward with it now.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Sites.
I would be happy to go to look at it in June and July again.
Councilor
It
Seymour.
would be nice. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Ms. Parker. I would also like if we could get a better idea, even just the equivalency of what it's cost when we were constructing the ballot language for collective bargaining, just a better idea of what some of that very rough, what it would cost for the second phase, if it were to pass, if that's possible.
Thank you. Councilor Seymour.
Prefer to move forward now.
Councilor Scully.
I prefer to wait till June or July.
Councilor Smith.
I would prefer to move forward now. I think we're already polling, that's the poll. I believe that this is the poll itself, is to ask our residents. So I'd prefer now.
Councilor Bowles.
I would prefer to hold this off and wait until June or July, have a better idea of the timing and what we're getting into. Yeah, so that's my opinion. Thank you.
And Mayor Atchison.
I'm for delaying until the July timeframe so we understand better where we are as a city.
And I show 3 votes to move forward now and 4 votes to revisit this issue.
Okay. Is there any other questions or comments, Mr. Tripp or Mr. Frankel, either one, on any of the other items on item 2?
No, I don't
None
have
from me.
Okay. All right, Mr. Tripp, can we move forward with item 3?
Yes, and to move through this, I'm just going to open it up with Max Kirschbaum for, I think he has a brief EOC update, and then Max, you'll be followed by Larry, and if you folks would just queue up and move into your comments. Larry. And,
Mr. Tripp, before you start, I've got several council members are asking for a short bio break. It's currently 8:30. Council, I'm going to give you about 8 minutes. Let's just say it be back in the session by no later than 8:40. It gives everyone time to get away from the thing and go get a short bio break. So council and staff, we are on a short recess for approximately 10 minutes. All right, Ms. Parker, are you there?
I am back, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Ms. Parker, can you tell if all council members are back?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, having some microphone issues. Yes, are you ready for me to call the roll?
Yeah, but Mr. Tripp, have your staff ready to go back? I know we've got another minute or so.
Mr. Kirschbaum, are you back?
I'm ready anytime.
Okay.
We're ready.
All right. Ms. Parker, take the roll and make sure we got all the council back.
Certainly. Mayor Atchison,
Here.
Councilor DeMott,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Sites,
Here.
Councilor Seymour,
Here.
Councilor Scully,
Here.
Councilor Smith,
Present.
and Councilor Bowles.
Here.
Okay. Mr. Kirschbaum, would you pick it up from where you're at, please, then?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Last week, on behalf of the Emergency Operations Center, I gave you a short update on the process of reopening of city facilities planning. And I had told you at that time that we had finished a template that we intended to use as we applied it to various facilities. From then until today, I can add that we have a draft plan in for review for reopening one or both libraries. We have a draft plan getting underway for City Hall. And we have a draft plan in for review for the municipal court. There are others underway, some within departments that will be submitted, but that is the status of the ones that we are a little bit further along in the review process. Certainly interested in what Tri-County Health Department and Jefferson County Public Health may decide to do later this week. Presumably that some sort of action will be forthcoming as the current extension to the stay-at-home order would expire on May 8th. If there are subject to any questions, that's really all I have to add at this point.
I'll add one thing, and that is that one of the first two criteria is stay-at-home order has been lifted. And so we need to hear about that first, and we haven't heard about that. There's been some indication it's possible that that'll go away on the 8th, but until we hear that, we can't say anything with certainty. If it does go away on the 8th, the policy committee, which Max is part of, deputy city managers, assistant to the city manager, and communications and innovation director, have decided to approve golf because they've met all the other criteria to our satisfaction. But that's got to be we've got to have that stay-at-home order come off. At the same time, Parks and Recreation Department has been working on other openings or partial openings or different types of service delivery in libraries. Also looking at, as we move into the outdoor season, the possibility of doing some things at some of our parks and open spaces. So there'll be more to come, and we'll have something to report each week. But I just wanted to mention that because it's possible that next week when we meet, we'll already have opened the golf courses. I'll turn to the mayor, who's going to give a regional update as to some of his activities and other information.
Well, I think the thing that's most concerning right now is what action, if any, will be taken by our two health departments. There's a lot of discussion still going on. We've had some information that was shared with council today that hasn't gone out into a formal order in any case. As of the meeting I was in earlier this morning, there was some indication that Tri-County will be moving forward to release their next version of the order as early as close of business Thursday of this week. I have not heard the same from Jefferson County. The thing that we don't know in those orders is how far they're going to go. If they don't stay with the stay-at-home order and they go to safer at home, what are the restrictions that'll still be there? As the city manager indicated, as well as Mr. Kirschbaum, we don't have that draft order yet. So finding out where we're going to be at. Now, we do have a number of issues that are still going on within our the regional community, is that we have some cities that are taking action on various parts, not waiting for our health departments. So depending on what they do, and this is the concern that we've voiced before, is that we get into splits about what's being told to the public. We have the state safer at home. We still have Tri-County and Jefferson County still today under a stay at home. And now we're starting to see various cities take actions to implement activities in the event that the health departments don't. Some of those went into effect today. Some of them are going into effect on Wednesday. So we have a hodgepodge again of people not having clear direction to the community of what's expected of them. And still the issue could be different for us here in Westminster, that if we don't keep the two health departments on the same page, one half the city could be under one order and the other half under another one. And that's just not good business with the city, not to tell the citizens what's going on and adding to the confusion. We've constantly asked our health departments to stay as much as in line with the state as they could. But again, as I indicated on a conversation this morning, I know people like to direct their comments at either Dr. Johnson or Dr. Douglas. But as we talked about this morning on the chamber call, Dr. Douglas and Dr. Johnson represent a health board, which is made up of people who are appointed by the counties, who are members of those pieces, and they implement it very much like Mr. Tripp does, the directions of council. We may not agree with his directions, but he is representing the authority that has that ability to drive us. My concern, again, is that we get clear direction so that we can tell the general public and our businesses what they should be expecting to go into starting as early as Monday. And right now, we don't have that direction that's clear from both of them. I don't know how to get them to get us the information any sooner. They're still evaluating. We're still seeing deaths. Our statewide deaths are still running at about 20 a day. They are indicating on the latest conversations I've seen out of the governor's office, expecting still an uptick in the numbers. Our testing is not to the level that we can get off of the safer at home, the 2-week notice. And the ability to get the testing done and processed is still a hangup, along with the things that we've talked about before, the test kits and the reagents. We just haven't seen a lot of relief on a regional basis that we're getting that done. That's all I can tell you right now from a regional. These conversations are multiple times a day, every day, and trying to get to a final decision on where we're going to be. But again, our health departments are the two people, or the two groups, not people, that are driving what we're going to have to make a decision on. Don, let's go to the CARES Act, because I don't have anything else on the regional.
Mayor and Council, thank you for approving the IGA with Adams County. As Larry mentioned, the Jefferson County one will be right on its heels. I think a draft was actually received today by the city attorney. He needs to look at that and have time to get it in front of you. But that was good that we got that far. So we are ready to go, and it is going to be between the two counties. The $9 million that we have available to us is going to help. We just want to make sure we spend it in a way that meets the requirements and also follows the policy of the city, which is you folks, of course. So Larry is prepared tonight to make a presentation to you about our thinking on this, and I'm asking for your forbearance to give me the latitude to work within those bounds and to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity that we have to put some money back into our kitty that's going to be used because of this virus. So Larry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. And Mr. Williams, if you would advance to my first slide there. Thank you, sir. I just want to provide some information as concise a format as possible. And I too would like to thank you, Mayor and City Council, for approving Resolution 15 to allow the city to take the next steps relative to the CARES Act and its funding. And I also want to give thanks to the City Attorney's Office and various other staff who've worked very, very rapidly, faster than any other city, I'll tell you that, to get an IGA reviewed, organized, and in front of you, Mayor and Council, the elected body, to get this approved. It's been very expedient, and I thank you for that very much. So now, and if I may say, just as the mayor described some of the regional challenges related to the health department, it is also health departments, plural. It is also a challenge in working across the two counties to secure these CARES funds for Westminster, but we're working very hard on that. First, related to these acronyms, forgive me, I do want to just expand on them, and I saved a little space on the slide, but last week I gave a little update on this, and all of this is related to the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act as signed into law on March 27th. Within the act, this federal act, the Coronavirus Response Fund, Relief Fund has been created, and that's providing for money to relieve some of the issues surrounding coronavirus. And I will tell you that the next wave, in the left-hand column, I've got some of the costs that can be covered, but in the next phase, we'll be looking very carefully on more details as to what costs may be covered and which ones cannot. I'm engaged with the Adams County and Jefferson County financial leaders at those various governments, and we're thinking about all the different possibilities and seeking assistance from our various attorneys to understand which of those may be legal and not, and so that we'll be prepared to provide you, council, with a few more details at the appropriate time in the future. But first, these funds can be used for expenditures. Here you see under number 1, incurred due to the public health emergency. So expenditures incurred. That means very clearly that it cannot be used to backfill the revenue shortfall, and something that I described a little bit earlier on tonight. In addition, number 2, expenditures that were not accounted for in the city's most recent budget. So if the city had planned to budget for a certain expenditure earlier this year, we cannot sort of backfill that expenditure with these CARES Act funds. And then last, and certainly not least, in fact, very, very significant, is that the funds must be expended by the end of the year. And that's actually punctuated within the Adams County intergovernmental agreement that was just approved. The county has put in a restriction of December 4th of this year. The reason that they've moved the date earlier on the calendar is that if the city has not spent those funds, they would be returned to Adams County, whereby the county would have the opportunity to spend those funds either in the county or return them to the federal government. So these are some sort of broad guideposts as to what CARES Act funds may be used for, but we'll be attempting to get into a few more details as we move ahead and can better define what these funds can be spent on and what they cannot. But to facilitate the next steps, as City Manager Tripp just described, we as staff want to begin organizing around some guiding principles for the spending of these funds, ultimately to be approved by council, but it makes sense for our team to prepare a proposal that will have some details, but will be grounded in these guiding principles before we do our work. And you know, as I go through these, I would ask you to reflect on aid, relief, and economic security, which is really what the CARES Act is intended to do, and that's hence some of the guideposts. But perhaps these guiding principles will help us in. They're intended to help us in creating a program. So first is economic recovery, and I think that generally this will be self-explanatory in helping the recovery of our local economy in Westminster. We've done some of that already with the Westy Rise Business Grant Program. We've already heard from our Economic Development Director, John Hall, of one of a number of stories that have proven that this has been a good decision. And we'll see this in the future with our return on the investment as well, I believe. So economic recovery, things similar to Westy Rise, and we will be making additional recommendations that can aid in the recovery of the Westminster economy. Social recovery. This is somewhat that relief idea within CARES. And in hoping to recover the quality of life in Westminster by both providing programs and perhaps partnering with others that will rebuild our community connections and promote wellness. We've certainly discovered the many ways that people have been able to achieve this sort of social interaction, but with appropriate distances and maintaining public health. We don't know what a lot of these look like. I can tell you that our staffs are learning about ideas from across the country. We're engaged with all our professional associations in parks, recreation, historical preservation, libraries, and all the ways that the activities in our community will allow people to connect socially. And we think that the way that folks engage in their library services and outdoor recreation will evolve. Some will be the same, but some will be different. But we think that this is a key guiding principle in our CARES Act funding. Third, people and programs, serving people. So much has been said about the idea of making sure that the housing and food security for those who are vulnerable within the Westminster community can be served. We know that it will make sense to partner with others across the region who have deep experience and infrastructure and resources already. So we think that that's a very critical element of CARES Act funding, and we'll be outlining some suggestions in that area as well. And then last but not least is local government recovery, and that's a recovery that will help us in our various businesses as a city transition our employees and our visitors to our various facilities in adapting to this changing work environment. We know that we'll have various infrastructure needs and sanitizing needs at our various locations, and we'll prepare for that in an innovative way that helps ensure the health and safety of all as we get back to business that's similar to the way that it was done in the past. And we know that we'll have some expenditures, direct expenditures that will fall for qualification under the CARES Act. As a foundation to it all, I have here an asterisk related to community sustainability, and that is to the extent that we can in any way maximize federal disbursements by planning ahead, we think that this is the best approach to it and will help us achieve community sustainability. So those would be some of the guiding principles for dispersing CARES Act funds. It's expected, as you'll see on my next slide, Mr. Williams, if you would advance to that, I'd like to go through some of the details and next steps that we see here. You know, we could have certainly gotten into some of these guiding principles and ideas for disbursements, but we really needed to focus on getting this intergovernmental agreement accomplished and proposing some guiding principles for you, Mayor and Council, tonight. So CARES Act, it's just over a month old, 5 weeks, is signed into law. It's 900 pages long. The relief fund section itself is very extensive, and we needed to really kind of organize around understanding what it was, which funding would be provided at different levels, and then of course significant engagement across our 2 county partners and also at the state level. A lot of advocacy and communication happening at the state level. But in anticipation that Adams County, which received its funds on April 20th, there was a lot of dialogue happening across both counties. That's when they received it. And then just tonight, obviously we've gotten our intergovernmental agreement done, but next steps are a week from Tuesday, the Adams County Board of County Commissioners will approve disbursements in a formal meeting. In turn, City of Westminster now, with your authority given, will present its invoice for 1/3 of the funding, and we will receive that, we believe, the next business day or the following. 1/3 of the funding is outlined in the intergovernmental agreement, or $1,835,000. None of those funds will be appropriated without the approval of council. It does give us a little bit of time to first test these guiding principles with you, have a bit of a plan and recommendation around that. And then also, hopefully in the interim, as City Manager Tripp just described, we've got an intergovernmental agreement draft in hand in the city attorney's office. It's proposed an additional $3,528,000 in addition to the $5.5 million from Adams County. So just over $9 million in total. And we would hope to have a holistic, comprehensive plan surrounding all of that. And then we will be required, relative to this intergovernmental agreement we have in hand, we will be required to make monthly reports to Adams County as to our spending with, receipts and a description of our disbursements. But all of that will require appropriations from City Council. And then as my closing here, you can see perhaps the most critical, and one of the reasons that we're excited to move forward with these guiding principles is that we have until December 4th to return any unspent funds to the county. And we would hope to see all of those funds invested and dispersed to City of Westminster for the idea of aid, relief, and economic security, and the guiding principles that I set forth just a bit earlier. So with that, Mayor, let me turn it back to you for questions and comments, and ask Mr. Williams if you'd go back to my previous slide so that council members can see those guiding principles, and would be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Larry. Larry, whether it's you, Mr. Tripp, or whoever, under the first guiding principle, economic recovery, we've had the RISE Act that we did. We had 400 applications come in for the $1.5 million. And I know the staff's been killing themselves, working nights and weekends to try to get all that reviewed, approved, and get the checks out. Do we know where we're at on that program?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's Larry speaking. I may invite Mr. John Hall to make a few comments on that. I know the statistics and the outputs are updated every single day, but Mr. Hall, would you be able to address a couple of those comments?
I would. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Can you all hear me all right?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
So as of Friday, we were working from a base that turned out to be 316 applications, completed applications that had been submitted. The 400 number that we had reported earlier and during the initial receipt of applications included a number of duplicates and incomplete applications. So in total, we started with 316 applications. Of those 316, we've approved 214. And those 214 equate to a total dollar amount of $884,000. We have 200 checks that have been mailed out as of Friday, so we're still waiting to get some checks out. Those may have gone out today. The average award amount for each of the applications was $4,100. 177 of those 214 businesses that received assistance had less than 10 employees. 12% had 11 to 20 employees. So there were a handful that had slightly more than 20 employees. And the majority of those businesses were retail or restaurant enterprises. And we will be providing a more detailed written breakdown for you in the near future. We had approximately 100 applications that were denied. And there were generally two reasons for denial. We required that businesses be impacted by the public health orders, that is, that they would have to dramatically limit their operations. And we also required that businesses be in good standing with the city. Of those 100 denials, over half were not in good standing with the city. Some were not required to dramatically limit operations as a result of the public health orders. The remainder were a handful of denials related to other program criteria. Two were corporately owned national chains, which we excluded from consideration. One had more than 50 employees, a number of smaller number of businesses in each of those categories. So council had approved $1.5 million with roughly $900,000 being expended. That leaves $600,000 to go out and help some additional businesses. We didn't reach the 1.5 million again because we had calculated an award amount of about $7,500 per business, and the average came in at $4,100. So today, some of you may have seen an email blast that went out announcing that we would be reopening the application process at 8 o'clock Wednesday morning. We will send another email blast out tomorrow, and it's of course posted on our website. That's a quick update of where we are, and I'm happy to answer any questions that council might have.
John, staying with that for just a second before I go to council. Is there an opportunity that any of those that had problems with their application can cure those applications and then resubmit?
Mayor and council, we started sending out denial letters with or denial notices, many of them by email, late last week and over the weekend with reasons for denial. We have been receiving a number of phone calls. We invited people to contact us and if they believed that they were denied in error. We've had a few applications where it appears that they had provided us with incorrect information. And we ourselves, of course, are not immune to mistakes. So we are more than happy to take a second look at applications. A reminder, however, that one of the criteria of the program was that companies be in good standing as of March 1st. And we picked March 1st really to err on a cautious side that was before the closures and the stay-at-home orders went into effect, so that we believed that that's when businesses would have had the best chance to be in good standing with the city. Beyond that, businesses would have to demonstrate that there was a mistake in their application or that kind of thing to be reconsidered. Happy to answer any additional questions on that.
All right, Ms. Sykes.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just a little slow on getting the mute off there. So thank you so much for presenting us with these guiding principles. I'm going to go back to the conversation we were having with Larry Dorr, but do want to say thank you to Economic Director John Hall for all his work he's done on the RISE program to date. And I'm glad that we're scrutinizing and making sure that we're following our criteria and that people that we're distributing these funds to are truly people who met them. So thank you for that work. And I'm happy to help promote that we have more funds available as of Wednesday. So I had a quick question in regards to these guiding principles, which look very good to me. I wanted to see, do we contemplate that we will utilize these dollars for any and all of these? So for instance, do we anticipate that we will hit all of them, or is it possible that we would only do one of them? What is staff thinking at this point?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Larry Dorr speaking again. Our job will be to make recommendations and present ideas in each of these categories. I would imagine that the council and the community would envision making an impact and having a positive result by making choices in each of these categories. Of course, you as policymakers could choose something different, but our job is first to test that these guiding principles make sense, and then to present opportunities with some relative costs related thereto. And then you'll be able to make choices across that entire spectrum that equate to the $9,035,000 that we're anticipating. So hopefully that'll be a nice mix, and it will take some intense work. And before we embark on that, we want to really test that each of these individually make sense. If only 3 of the 4 make sense, we'll just plan around 3 of the 4.
I think you captured 5 that makes sense, and I like that community sustainability as a guiding principle, making sure that it makes sense for our community in the long haul. So thank you so much for your work on this. I look forward to hearing what my colleagues think.
Mr. Voles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to thank economic development staff for their hard work on the RISE program for small businesses in our community. Job well done on that. That was my question, actually. What's the status? Where are we? How many businesses were helped? How many grants mailed out? And the mayor asked that, and that's been answered. So again, thank you for that program and your work on that. I guess my other question then would be for Mr. Dorr, possibly. What do we do about redundancy? Is there any concern that the county may offer a program or the state may offer a program, and then we're kind of also offering similar program? Where is there any concern that there might be redundancy, meaning people were overlapping with something that someone else is already doing? I don't know if that makes sense or not. Am I wording that in a way you understand?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Voles. You're absolutely right. This is a great concern. The last thing that we want to do is waste any of these funds. They're very special, and we want to make sure that we get the greatest return on our investment or the greatest impact to the community. And what we don't want to do is overlap exactly as you described. So communication is just going to be paramount across the city, the counties, and the state to make sure that we can have the greatest strategic impact on our our city, our counties, and our region in whole. So I can tell you that a lot of communication is happening around that already. I think it's one of the reasons to spread these funds is that there's an ability to have a different impact in a different way depending on who's leading some of the investment. So I would just tell you that this is a great concern. We're working very hard on it. We're good at communicating. We have great partnerships at the county and state level, and we're going to work very hard to make sure that there's as little overlap as possible. And frankly, also let the least amount of opportunity for those who might seek to receive double resources. We don't want to see that either. So it's a great concern. We're going to work on it.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Mr. Dorr. I appreciate that. That's all I have.
Mr. Demott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I have a handful of thoughts and questions. So one thing I'm wondering is, and I've kind of looked at some other documents that I've seen in other cities as far as like the full guidelines, which you've kind of summarized for us, which I appreciate, of what the money could be used for. So you kind of alluded to we've talked about the grants program. So I have one question on that and then a thought. So first, and this is probably for Mr. Hall, when you say that they're not in good standing, like can you gauge that for me? Is it, what is in not good standing, and is there degrees of not good standing? Was there any room for saying, maybe we'll help this business anyway? Like, can you tell me what that looks like?
Unmuted.
Thank you, Councilor. Apologize, I was having some trouble getting unmuted. Yes, I can give you a very clear definition of what we mean by good standing. So the first thing would be that a business would need to have a business license, City of Westminster business license. The second would be that they didn't have any back taxes owed or were not late on tax liabilities. The third would be that they didn't owe any utility charges or bills, a water bill, for example. And the fourth would be that they are in good standing with the Secretary of State's office.
Okay. And so I guess on that question, I think I'm hearing an echo from your computer, John. Are we concerned that those businesses that are already struggling to pay their taxes and or utility, that we're going to see a lot of those businesses, fail if they were already in a hard spot before this all hit? And we put any consideration into that? Not that, and I don't know if that changes the way we look at these programs or not, but I'm just curious. And then the other part of that, which would be for John too, is, and maybe for Larry, is with this money, does this give us the ability, since we pulled that money out of our reserves and it seems like we could use this money for the same thing, that maybe we expand that program? Is that kind of what you're thinking? I mean, that seems like it would follow your principles here.
Thank you, Council. I'm going to try and do this without too much echo and then turn it over to Mr. Dorr. That was the reason we picked the March 1st date. We felt like that was a date at which the businesses would have been most healthy and was the best measure of their standing with the city. I am always concerned about small businesses and their ability to keep up with expenses across the board, not just taxes they may owe the city, but their rent and their utilities and that kind of thing. We picked March 1st as a way to try and provide the most leeway that we could to ensure that businesses were in good stead as they applied for this program.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. And Larry speaking again, I'll just add on to the second part of that. Councilor DeMott, we first want to test if this is a recommended guiding principle that you as a council believe that economic recovery and further investment in providing small businesses with grants and other support is sensible. If it is, we're certainly going to bring a plan to you. It could include many things. I don't want to get ahead of myself and speculate on what they might be, but certainly it could be a continuation or an expansion of West Uriah Small Business. It could involve other resources, products, supplies, other things that will support small business. So our first step is really to test you, the policymaker, to make sure that this economic recovery and businesses and grants and support make sense. So we're sort of at the front end of that, but it's certainly one that we believe you should consider and is a sensible one.
Thank you both. I guess, and I have a couple other points I want to hit, but on that, my preference as a council person would be that we look at how we can expand that. And I understand we had to kind of pick a time when we think, they look healthy. I guess my concern is with small businesses, it's a hard undertaking a lot of times for somebody to decide, say they're new small businesses. And I know, for example, I work for a franchisor, and that first couple of years of somebody buying a franchise, that's their hardest time to start becoming solvent and being able to make money. So and I don't know how you gauge that, if maybe there's a way that we could dig into that a little bit more about the good standing piece, because my concern is that we're going to end up with a bunch of these small businesses that aren't going to be able to weather this. So I definitely would be in favor of us figuring out how we can further expand that program to businesses that we think are going to be able to weather this, because ultimately our economic engine is what pays for all the other things that we've talked about throughout the night and will continue to talk about. So that's my take on that. A couple other things that I wanted to talk about that are more under the local government recovery principle. I've brought up before about testing, and I know that that's something we've talked about looking at. I would just want to put forward that I'm still interested in us being able to at least have testing available for our frontline people. And I know we have partnerships, so however this could further those partnerships or give them the ability to do that. The other thing that I've brought up before about taking care of people that are frontline people who are out there at risk, I've heard other cities doing things like hazard pay. I've brought up in the past about, what does it look like to take care of somebody that ends up getting COVID and is, out of work. And I know we have different things that you guys are trying to accommodate those types of situations. But the reason I bring those things up is I hope that those are the kind of things that you guys are going to look at under that local government recovery portion of your guiding principles. And I just wanted to bring them up because those are things that I desire that we're at least making part of the conversation. Aside from that, I appreciate the presentation, and I don't have anything else at this time, Mr. Mayor.
All right, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for gathering this information for us. Mr. Dort, what would be staff's priority? If you could pick one out of this list, what would you focus on?
Well, let's see. I don't think there would be any one. I think that our approach to this as a staff has been to be holistic and to try to look at multiple opportunities across these four major guiding principles, and really to have that mesh with what's intended under CARES, which is aid, relief, and economic security. And we think that runs the entire spectrum. So I don't think there's necessarily any one that is most important. We think we can have a very strategic impact across these four categories. And I don't know that these might be weighted equally or tilted to one side or another. That'll be up for council to decide. So our test is to just make sure these are sensible and then to present some ideas going forward. So I'm sorry, couldn't say there's any one. Our job is to really to try to approach this with different opportunities.
Sure, thank you for that input. I think it more aligns with Councilor DeMott. I heard about our core services tonight about maintaining our streetways and maintaining operations just in general. So I think I'm leaning more towards, just as a counselor perspective, I'm leaning more towards the economic recovery and potentially the local government recovery. I would just need to understand a little bit more of what that local government recovery would look like, because I'm for putting dollars towards testing and the PPE requirements for whether that be for masks or taking temperatures or whatever we need to do to be keeping our staff healthy is important. And so I think that we need to look at that core services part, because I get really hesitant on where we're at with those services, because as we saw, that we're still kind of lagging in our dollars that we're putting towards maintaining our streets. And so with gas tax down and all of that, I hope that we are considering potentially putting these dollars into our streets, core services, things like that. So thank you again for this. I think most of my questions have been asked by previous counselors, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Smith. If I may just respond to one comment that you made there. I beg your pardon, Mayor. I just want to respond to one thing that Councilor Smith touched on there, and that is under the local government recovery, unfortunately, the city council wouldn't be able to appropriate CARES funds for the purpose of providing for streets and just any municipal purpose, but rather, as you see in the slide here, that we have to use those related to expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency, as you see in number 1. So that's one of the harsh realities that's happening, is that we won't be able to use these funds to backfill programs like our streets or other things, or backfill the city's revenues. And that I commented on that very early on tonight when we got into the subject of the resolution, and just beyond that when we were talking about the cost of an election, is we think the impact is somewhere onward of $30 million in revenue impact to the city and $9 million received in CARES funds. However, of the $9 million in CARES funds, nearly all of it would be used on, as was described earlier, some of the ideas were like a hazard pay or PPE or testing or some of those other things. So I just want to make sure it's understood that if we don't see some of those traditional core services, it's because of this number 1 that's on the left side of the slide here tonight, is incurred due to public health emergency. So that has to be a very direct link to that. And we anticipate being audited by the federal government or presenting an audit that would be reviewed by the city's external auditors. We receive federal funds all the time, every year, and we know that how those audits work. And so we'll have to stay within those guidelines under the CARES Act and so forth. So I just wanted to touch on that and express it as one of the challenges related to this funding and some of the ideas related thereto, and the reason for our presentation of these guiding principles for tonight. So thank you. I just wanted to get that note in, Mr. Mayor.
No problem, because that was the same thing I was about to say, is that if you go back to number 1, many of the things that we've talked about will not qualify under the part of number 1 that's on the left-hand side. But even bigger is, because these are federal dollars, the amount of scrutiny that we will be facing on how we expend those, and the ability for us to validate how we're spending them and how they comply with those requirements is going to be much more intense and have to be much more scrutinized than what we have when we have the dollars that belong to us. Other comments from council on this particular item? All right, Mr. Tripp, let's go to the next item.
Before we leave this one, I want to be certain I'm understanding that we have support and on these guiding principles to be the way that we intend to spend the money.
Okay. Let me poll the council then real quick. Let me ask the council members if there is any member of the city council that does not support moving forward with the principles as defined by council, by staff. Would you please let me know at this point verbally? Hearing no objection, then I will move forward with the fact that we have been presented an outline details of those will be coming forward later on. And we'll still have an opportunity to look at these again, but at least for the beginning, the guiding principles are recommended as an approval moving forward. Mr. DeMott, did you have a last second question or a comment?
Just a comment, Mr. Mayor. I'm in favor as long as it includes the things that the council members mentioned, and I didn't hear anybody disagree with any of them. But just to be clear, because we did mention a handful of things that we felt like fit under those things, so I would like feedback if Mr. Tripp feels that we couldn't accommodate the areas that council touched on.
Well, I think one of those was just addressed by Mr. Dorr. Streets and stuff like that cannot be accommodated under this. So I think each one, each one that was
Understanding that they had to fit guidelines.
Yeah, if they fit the guidelines, I didn't hear anything back from Mr. Dorr or Mr. Tripp, either one, that said they would not be considered. But they still have to come back to council for approval. You have the direction you need, Mr. Tripp?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, you want to move to the next item?
Yes. I don't have really much of a report other than what you received today. We met with the boards of health last week. They seem to express some interest and support to making this, well, they did express interest and support to making this a countywide move. In the interim, there have been many cities go out on their own on this. I think the countywide approach was good and we preferred it. We received these emails this afternoon, which we shared with you, which would lead us to believe that they're not going to make it a part of any order, that we're going to be essentially under the same guidelines that we are today, except that they're going to, I believe, help us promote this, the voluntary use of face coverings. And Dr. Johnson has mentioned he would provide some direction as to what he thinks works best. So I don't have anything else other than that to update you on. We will continue to promote it as we are on our own media. And we were heartened to hear that Costco required it as a business. But I don't have any other comment except just to share that with you.
Any question from council? All right, folks, we need to stand by for just a minute. Councilor Smith has lost audio. Let's give her a second to get her audio reestablished. Ms. Parker, let me know if you can tell when Ms. Smith is reconnected.
I show Ms. Smith as connected.
Okay.
I am not certain. I believe we
Nope, I
also
just got it.
lost Councilor DeMott for a moment, but I believe he is back on.
Okay. Mr. DeMott, are you back in?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you. Ms. Smith, you're okay again?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, can we restart? I missed most of everything that was said.
All right, Mr. Tripp, can you kind of repeat summary of what you had last said?
Yes, Mayor and councilors, I don't really have a long report tonight except to share with you and to just comment briefly on what we heard from the departments of health following last Monday night's meeting. I met with the executives of both the health departments and expressed to them that we'd like some direction on face coverings. And they told myself and the mayor that they believed they could support and would support a countywide health order. We've been waiting to hear that or receive that. And we were a bit surprised today to hear that they've decided to not go in that direction for the reasons they've outlined. We have, from last meeting forward, been promoting the use of face masks and encouraging that on our media. We'll continue to do that. Dr. Johnson has also agreed to provide some further direction on things that we can instruct the public. And I think both health departments, both health boards are willing to say that they recommend this. So that will be helpful in their position to do it. But and I think the only other thing I mentioned is that several other cities have taken action to move on their own in the interim. And I think that's all I have to say about it.
Okay. Mr. Vols, you had a comment?
I do, thank you. And this may be a little bit in the weeds, but for point of clarity or consistency, are we using the word mask, or are we using face coverings, or is it interchangeable, or have we had any recommendation from the county health departments for point of consistency? Are we using face masks as the title here when we do communication outreach, or are we using face coverings? Because those face coverings kind of cover more areas and more what people are using, but I think people use the phrase face masks the most. I know it's kind of an obscure point, but I'm just curious if we have any guidance yet on that.
No, my use of the term face covering was specifically because the two of them suggested we do that as a part of any media we provide. And the reason is that they don't want to confuse it with face masks that could be N95 masks that are needed in the supply chain for public health reasons. And so they wanted to separate that. And it also gives people a little more flexibility in understanding what it is they can use. They can use a bandana, anything that would separate them from, if they were to sneeze or cough from exposing somebody else or being exposed.
Good. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Ms. Seitz, did you have a comment? I'm not sure.
I did not put my name in the queue yet. I was actually commenting just that asking Lindsay when she got back on the phone to let us know she was there. I will say I did get the emails today from both Dr. Johnson and Dr. Douglas, and I also was surprised. I had literally up until 4:30 today been on a call with Adams County on the Monitoring, Compliance, and Evaluation Committee. And in that call, there was a representative from Tri-County Health that talked about how important all of the different preventative measures really, truly are. It was very similar in many ways to our pavement presentation, that it's much more effective and helps us to not, if we lower the transmission, that's better than treating and getting the hospital capacity up. So I was a little taken aback that they weren't moving forward. I almost felt certain that they would based off of that conversation. Tonight, is this just an update, or are we wanting to get the feel from council? What is your desire of us right now?
It's an update. I don't have any different recommendation than we had last week. And that was that you had options to either promote and educate, or to ask me to enact an emergency order. And a week has gone by. One of the two health departments reported that they did some surveying and they thought they saw an improvement or better, compliance here in Westminster. Everybody has their own personal experience. I haven't seen personally anywhere near that in the grocery stores I've been in, but hopefully it is moving in that direction. The other thing that, is a societal issue right now, that, this requirement of face masks has become a difficult situation between people and between sometimes businesses and people. So, one of the things I told you last week is that I was really concerned about the impact this would have on police. And we don't want to do anything that is going to be in the middle of a very, very strong emotional differing set of opinions between people. Ours would not have been, this would probably not have lasted very long. We're a week into it right now. And I think even the orders that have been issued by the individual cities Most of those are relatively short term. So I really don't have anything else to say about it. We got a lot of other things we're working on now. That was one issue that came up in the moment that we brought forward to you that we considered important in the moment, and we're on to the next issue to deal with, which includes the expense of spending these dollars we just received. Councilor DeMont mentioned testing. That's something that we're actually actively talking about in the organization right now, is what we as a city can do to support testing in our community, moreover, and particularly for our own frontline people. So there's a lot of other priorities that we have to work on. If the council would like to step back and have a greater discussion about it and go some other direction tonight, we'd follow your direction, but I'm not asking you to do that.
Ms. Smith, you had a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I do have a comment. I think one of the reasons that we had added this as an agenda item was partly because in our Monday meeting, I think from my understanding, we were all under the impression that we were all in agreement of education moving forward with residents, with looking at other options as far as requiring masks. I don't think that we ever, from my recollection, had come to an agreement as a council on a requirement. So when asked to provide thoughts as far as writing a letter to our counties, and I understand that things are changing on a dime, it was a great surprise to myself that we were moving forward with a recommendation of requiring masks. And I think that it was very clear, especially for myself, that I think we're all in agreement that the importance of our community and the residents of Westminster is of the highest priority, but how the requirement of a mask, we're not all there. We're not on the same page. And so I think also the biggest hangup was where as the council were we at? Was it sent in? Was it not sent in? And so that, I think, was some mix-ups and things going on last week. I think there was just a lot that seemed really out of place, and just what felt to be we were on one page and then had to shift gears and try a different page. So I stand by my I wrote the governor and our county health departments, not on behalf of the council, but as a citizen, explaining my thoughts on this requirement. And I just think that I don't agree with it. And I'm actually pleasantly surprised to see that we're kind of pulling back the reins and actually seeing from our health departments that they mentioned, I think they mentioned that 86% of Westminster, from what they observed, that 86% of Westminster residents are actually wearing them on their own accord. So that without an order. So that was reassuring to see. So that's, I think, one of the biggest reasons why we got this on the agenda, is to talk about the consistency and where we're at and just getting on the same page as a council.
Well, thank you, Councilor Smith. I have to say, thank you, but I have to say I respectfully disagree. I wasn't pursuing an absolute policy that was contrary to direction from council. We weren't really pursuing an absolute policy. We were asking the health departments what they thought about this and how they might be able to communicate and have a solution here that was better for people to understand, because it was uniform. But I appreciate your comment.
Other comments from council on this item?
I don't know if my chat is working, Mr. Mayor, but I've been trying to type in and it looks like it's grayed out. So I don't know if you got me or not.
I do not, but go ahead.
So a couple things. So I had sent some emails on this, and I have to say I'm a little frustrated and whole by the letter. And it's not completely out of the ordinary for us to be asked for something like that on a dime. However, the situation this last week has made me question whether or not I think that we should continue that sort of policy, and I'll share why. As early as this morning, I heard the mayor share that he was in a meeting with the city manager where they were talking about the letters. And I know I've voiced concern and was explained why we didn't get the letter after it was voted on, but when we were asked, we voted, and then I found out later that the letter was sent, and I never got feedback that it was. I would have asked to be clearly spelled out who all had or hadn't supported it, because to be clear, 40% of the council didn't support it. One of the things that I do remember from the meeting last week was, and maybe you don't see it, Mr. Tripp, as inconsistent as far as the policy direction, but I do think that we were waiting for some answers. And one of the reasons that I've seen stated as far as mandates versus not mandate versus education is being able to actually enforce it. And so I thought one of the things that we were going to hear back that would have been good to hear back before doing a letter is, could our police even really help with that, or would they be required to help with that, or what their feedback was? And I thought that was one of the questions that was going to be put out. So I just have those concerns I wanted to share, because I emailed about it and there was some response, but I wanted to reshare and go on the record and be able to dialogue about it.
Well, somewhat of a response to this, as I indicated in the conversation, we have meetings that are going on every day and sometimes multiple times a day. And the council discussed this on Monday of last week. After that, we got a request during a meeting in which the city manager and I happened to be in, from the health departments, asking us to give them guidance on where our city stood. That letter was prepared. It was sent to city council. It was a response by individuals coming back to the city manager on whether or not to give that letter out. And the letter clearly indicated this was not a unanimous decision. That guidance was given to the county health departments to help them decide what they wanted to do. And I think that had an impact on the fact that they came back and said they did not want to make it a mandatory issue, but would leave it up to individual cities and our businesses. And we know that starting today, some of our businesses have taken it upon themselves that they feel that they need to further protect the employees working in their businesses, and are going ahead with mandating that any customer coming into their business has to have face covering. Back to the question about, we're trying to get people to shift to the letter of face covering versus mask. And as to the city manager's standpoint, the surgical mask and the N95 mask are what we want to keep, not having people go out and hoard or buy up, because we need those for our first responders. But any kind of face covering, based on what the health department is saying, is beneficial. But we also have this problem that is now being created because we don't have a consistency across the two health departments. We have multiple cities within our Tri-County and Jefferson County that are taking stands that they're mandating face coverings for anybody out going into any of the critical businesses or into public. Denver, the city and county, is taking effect with that on Wednesday. As I indicated earlier, in the Boulder County area, Boulder County, the city of Boulder, Louisville, Lafayette, Longmont, Superior are all taking actions on what's been indicated by at least by their mayors in conversation, that they are going to have on their discussions tonight and tomorrow night, depending on what night they meet, the mandate that the face coverings will be required within their cities. This is the exact position we were hoping not to get to, so that we have a hodgepodge of this mixed up in the metro area, because people go from one municipality to the other. They don't know for sure what order they're under, if they're under an order at all. So trying to keep these clarifications, and as Ms. Smith indicated, this stuff is changing rapidly during the day. We have at least something back as of late this afternoon on where the health departments that affect us are taking a stand. So they are not going to move forward with a requirement of face coverings, but have left it up to the cities and to the individual businesses. Now, what I haven't heard in the discussion tonight is whether or not there is a move from council to declare that they want to enforce the requirement. Right now, we have a number of businesses that are asking for help. The order coming through did not give them the help they were looking for. We have others that are taking upon themselves to not wait on the order because they have an opinion that's different from the health department. I think what Mr. Tripp has pointed out, we've answered the questions as much as we can to the health department. They're now coming out with what we believe will be their order of not going forward with a mandate. And at this point, as far as I'm concerned, my conversation around this is what's going to come from the health department. It's not mandated. And unless there's a move by a majority of council to do this on our own, I think we move on to the next item. Ms. Seitz, you had a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the discussion, and I just want to circle back. Last Monday, I stated for the record, and I still believe I would have been comfortable mandating at a city level face masks at essential services. But I did think it would be better to have an approach that I thought Councilor Seymour had a very good point, which was, it was already confusing enough with having the two levels of orders between the state with the governor's office and CDPHE, and then also with our local health departments. And it's frustrating because, I don't put very much weight into the concept that asking people to wear face masks so we can lower the transmission and open up our local economy is somehow an infringement on liberty. I feel right now I have both a pretty weighty responsibility and the privilege to be in a position where I have the opportunity to make policy decisions that directly impact our community and how we respond and how we rebound from COVID. And so this feels like a pretty heavy issue. And that it may have some level of impact on our ability to rebound open. I did see the letter from Dr. Douglas that they went to 10 stores in Westminster and tallied who was wearing masks, and we had 86% compliance. And I do want to acknowledge that and thank the residents that were in there, but that was a snapshot in time. And so my concern continues to be the impacts of public health on the workers at our essential retailers, on those of us who have to go buy groceries. Is this an undue risk to not require the masks? I'm also concerned with enforcement. I don't know if many folks saw the other day, I think it was today, a security guard in Flint, Michigan was shot dead, asking someone to comply with wearing a mask. That's horrible. That's abhorrent that somebody would feel so infringed by being asked to protect public health that they would murder someone. So I recognize that the enforcement issue is a big issue, and I don't know the answer to how we best handle that. But I would love to hear from my colleagues a little more on this issue. We have lots of rules that we enforce in regards to public health. I said it last time and I'll say it again. You cannot smoke in a daycare. You cannot smoke in a grocery store. You have to wear a shirt and shoes. So maybe maybe we should be more explicit. I believe last time either Councilor DeMont or Councilor Smith asked a question about can individual businesses make the decision like Costco did, and maybe we need to be more explicit and give them more cover so they feel comfortable making those decisions. Those are just my thoughts right now. I apologize. I realized I did not turn on my screen.
It's all right. Any other comments from council? Ms. Scully?
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would just echo what Mayor Pro Tem Sites said. I think she said it very well. I do not see asking people to wear a mask out of for public health reasons and out of courtesy to our fellow beings that we protect each other. We are in this together. And I don't think we're infringing on anybody's liberties. I think that liberty is what one person sees as a liberty for themselves is very different from what another person sees as liberty for themselves. And I believe that for public health reasons, we really need to help our businesses and wear our masks, wear our face coverings. I think that that's a beautiful way to say it. Leave the N95s to the healthcare industry, but the rest of us just, it's not going to be a permanent thing. It's temporary. It's until we can get past this very dangerous time and make sure that we are keeping each other healthy and help our society get back to what can be the new normal. Because I'm not sure we're going to be able to go back to the old normal, but let's try to get as normal as possible. And by wearing masks, we only make that easier and safer for all of us. So I would support Mayor Pro Tem Sites.
Other council members have a comment? I'm pausing to see if anybody has anything, and if I don't see anything pretty quick, I'll move on. Mr. Frankel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to follow up then, because based on the discussion from last Monday night, it was clear that between the options that were offered, there were options 2 and 3 that were presented. 2 would have been an order requiring masks. 3 was more of an educational outreach campaign. I understood there was some interest in between 2 and 3 on the part of council, and in the time since then, with the health departments having indicated they would potentially take up issue number 2, the drafting was undertaken last week, but I'm glad to bring forward, if council desires, either option, if there's consensus on the part of council. I can also update the drafts that I've made with the most recent guidance that has been promulgated by the health departments in the state.
Other comments by council? Ms. Scully, go ahead.
I would greatly appreciate that, Mr. Frankel. I think I would very much value that. Thank you.
All right, council, I'm looking for other feedback because we don't have a consensus one way or the other right now. Ms. Sykes.
Thank you. I would also like that.
And by that comment, I'm taking that you mean you want to have the city attorney bring forward the recommendation?
Correct. I apologize.
Okay. From the rest of the council, Mr. Demott, Ms. Smith, Mr. Bowles, Mr.
Mr.
Seymour.
Mayor, this is Mr.
Yes.
Demott. I can't, my chat doesn't work for some reason. I'm in
Okay.
favor of continuing with education. I still am not in favor of any kind of mandate. I would add, at this point, we've heard from our public health departments that we look to for this sort of thing, and they're saying they're not going to do it. So I maintain my position.
Okay. Mr. Seymour.
I will echo Councilor Demott's statement. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bowles.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I would also like to see a copy of the order. I think Mr. Frankel's offered that, and I would like to see that along with Councilor Scully and Site, or Mayor Pro Tem Site. So I think I would support that as well. One of my concerns would be, I guess I haven't said much on this, but one of my concerns would be consistency. You know, people, you shop at King Supers in Broomfield, and then you shop at King Supers in Westminster. Maybe they do, maybe we do it. How would we flatten out that inconsistency amongst jurisdictions? I guess that would be one of my concerns. I would still like to see it though. I would support that and would vote that way. Thank you.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I still stand where I am. I mean, I don't understand why we would move forward. I would love more information from Mr. Frankel, but I guess I'm just at odds with orders. If we have orders in place and we can't properly enforce them, then why have orders at all? I mean, one of my points was if a mother was running into a grocery store to get diapers and medicine for her children and accidentally forgot a mask, are we really going to prosecute in that regard? And it's just, I know that laws and orders are always get into gray areas, but I stand where I am. So thank you.
Okay. All right, Council, any last comments on this? And then I'll try to see if I can think where we're at anyway. I think we're not voting on anything at this point. We don't have anything to vote on. And what Mr. Frankel has offered to do is bring something back that has more detail and specificity to give us something to chew on and decide if we want to move forward with. I think I've heard from at least 4 of the council members that have said that they were interested in seeing what Mr. Frankel can bring forward. That doesn't mean that the other 2 agree or disagree with what would be in the content, but we don't have the content of that item. So with where I'm trying to understand where we're all at, I think we have a number of people who are interested in at least seeing what Mr. Frankel is bringing forward and then make a decision on any further action based upon what we see in that request from the city attorney's office. If there's a majority of the councils that believes I've covered this wrong, please let me know now. But we're not taking any action tonight other than asking the city attorney potentially to bring forward that so we have something to chew on. Mr. Demott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thought the question was to see if he would bring something forward, and you had 3-3. So I guess that would leave it to if you want to hear it come forward or not.
Well, right now, the last one I heard from was Ms. Smith said she'd be interested in seeing it, but she didn't necessarily support taking any kind of enforcement action. So that's where I thought I had the 4th council member. I have no problem of looking at what the city attorney might propose, but that doesn't mean I'm going to support what he proposes. I just want to see what it is and see what action would be there. And again, this would be no determination at this point of which way the council is going because we don't have anything in front of us to act on. Mr. Volz.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you've captured it exactly right. I think what you're saying, I agree 100% with how you're characterizing this. I guess I would also, along with that order, like to know, do we have a listing of, or do we know now, have other cities on their own done this kind of an order? Is this something we've seen anyone else do in the region or in the Denver metro region? Thank you.
Yeah, right now, the ones that I'm aware of is the one that's been in place for 2 weeks was Wheat Ridge within the metro area. There were 5 municipalities who had enacted this across the state. Denver is putting it into place for mandatory mask effective Wednesday. Lone Tree has also voted last week to enforce it in the city of Lone Tree effective today. Boulder has passed it. Boulder County has passed it. The cities of Louisville, Superior, Longmont, Lafayette, I think that's all of them in that group, are taking action on their recommendations either tonight or tomorrow night, depending on what night their council is meeting. I'm not aware of anything as far as with Broomfield or Arvada, Lakewood, Edgewater, Thornton, North Glen, or Commerce City. I've not heard anything from their mayors that that is on their council agenda tonight or tomorrow night. And so I can't answer that, but there are a number of the communities in the metro area that have taken that out. And one I didn't think about was Fort Collins also had instituted this as a mandate. Ms. Scully, I'll come back to you again, and then after that, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to, I need a point of clarification. I understood that Wheat Ridge was going to re-examine their stance on that last week. Did they do that? Do we know if they did that? And are they continuing forward, or I was just curious.
They went forward with theirs. What they did was they took out the penalty part of it. So there's no penalties in their order.
Thank you.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a point of clarification with Mr. Frankel. Can we reiterate what we are asking Mr. Frankel to accomplish for us? And then what would we in its entirety be looking at and ultimately having a say in?
Thank you. Mr. Frankel, can you describe your comments?
Certainly. As my drafts stand now, I have 2 documents prepared, which I will need to update with the health department guidance. But the 2 documents essentially were an order along the lines of Wheat Ridge with no penalty provision. And the second document is a resolution that would direct staff to begin an educational campaign. Those are really the 2 choices that I had been preparing. But if council would like to see both of those options, or would prefer just to see one of those options, obviously that's an option for you.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The education, so there, I guess I'm not understanding why we would need our legal department to move forward with an educational campaign with staff. Is that just for enforcement then, or are we truly educating?
The resolution would be an opportunity for City Council to direct staff to begin an educational campaign regarding COVID-19 health information and the wearing of face coverings. So it would cover potentially a scope that you could agree upon, but that would be designed to, through the city's outreach efforts, provide education on these issues. And a second part would be, if council wants, it could direct staff to evaluate and pursue city purchase of cloth or other non-medical face coverings, which could be distributed within the city.
Okay, thank you.
Policy options for your consideration.
Sure, because I think we were, from my recollection, we were mostly agreeing to the third option, which is kind of what you were just describing there. I mean, I guess I'm just uncertain why most times when we say move forward with it with staff, it doesn't require the legal component or quote unquote order, I don't know if that's the right word, to move forward with such a task. So I guess I just am unclear why we would have our legal department give the okay to staff to move forward on educational pieces.
Let me try to clarify. Mr. Frankel is part of the group that has to present anything that the council is going to vote on. And that would be part of them putting together that staff agenda item. His department's still going to be involved in that. And I think he's drafting up what is it the council wants to take the position on. So regardless of which way we go, his office is still going to be there. The agenda memorandum that comes from any staff group to council for a decision still goes through the city attorney's office.
Okay. Well, Mr. Mayor, now that I have more information, I'm for what we were in support of on Monday of last week, which was looking more at an educational campaign. I would have to look more at that second objective as far as what it looks like for purchasing masks, but I will be supportive of what I said last week, which was a direction of an educational campaign. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that would be what would be contained in the document that the staff under what Mr. DeFranco was just describing would be coming back to council for a formal action. Is that correct, Mr. Frankel?
Correct. The goal of putting this all in writing is to just start this conversation on council. And if you want to modify the document, and then if you can reach consensus, you can vote on adopting this as a resolution of city council.
Ms. Seitz? Sorry, Ms. Smith, did you have another one before I move on?
No. I was just saying thank you.
Okay, Ms. Seitz?
I remembered to turn on my camera. So I just wanted to provide a little additional clarity. I was saying I wanted both to be brought back. So both information on a educational campaign, but then also what a resolution would look like if we were to do it without an enforcement or without a penalty.
Ms. Scully?
I was as well. I would like to see both.
Mr. Frankel, is there that much of a variation between the two you've been contemplating about bringing those to council so that we can do a formal action on either one?
So the order requiring the wearing of face coverings does differ from the council implementing a city-sponsored educational campaign. The order would look like the Wheat Ridge order, and it would direct the wearing of face coverings. It wouldn't purely be an educational campaign. It would be an order for people to comply with, although it wouldn't have penalty provisions in it.
All right, Mr. DeMont.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to reiterate my position, I'm for education, just like I was last week. I'm not for an order. And again, I'll reiterate, if there's an order with no provision to actually do anything with it, it's no different than an educational piece. It's just extra work that we're going to do for I don't know what. So I just want to make sure that everybody's clear. I'm all for education, but not for any kind of mandate.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 21 minutes left in our time tonight. I think that we have talked about this order or not order, and I'm going to recommend that council have the staff bring forward the two pieces that they've discussed, and then we can take formal action and a vote in a formal setting and decide which way we want to go, or we can decide to not go either way. So we got a couple of minutes left if there's any last minute comments. Otherwise, Mr. Frankel, I'll ask you to, based on what I'm hearing from the panel, is you bring it both options to the table next week, if that's when you can have it ready. and then we'll consider it as a formal action on council on Monday.
I will.
And then we'll see how the vote goes at that time. Is there anything else the council wishes to discuss tonight in regards to the COVID-19 items? Mr. Frankel, do you or Mr. Tripp have any closing items?
I do not.
I don't, except to say that I'll certainly try to listen more intently. And if I've got clear direction to not move on something, I sure wouldn't do that. I have too much respect for my job and for you folks to do that. So I'll listen. I'll listen even better next time.
All right. All right, if there's no other items before the council, it's approximately 10:14, depending on which clock you're looking at. I have one in the room that has one time, my computer has another one, and my watch has another one. So I'm going to go by the one on the computer that just turned to 10:12. With no other business before this tonight, I am going to recess, or I'm going to adjourn the meeting for tonight, and we will see all of you next Monday. Before we close, Mr. Tripp, can you and staff confirm one of the questions that just came up? We have an agenda item or a scheduled item dealing with the police department proclamation. I got confirmation last Friday that that event was still scheduled for this Thursday. And since that's an outdoor public event, can you have staff please confirm that that is going to be open and that we're going to move forward with that between you and the police department?
Thank you for raising that. We'll get back to you first thing in the morning.
All right. Thank you. Everyone be safe. Enjoy the rest of your night. I know it's a long night and it's been a lot of items that we've covered today. So everyone be safe, and we'll see everybody next week.